Chapter 458. There was no sunlight in the depths of the Hades, but you didn't have to worry about not being able to see your surroundings. After all, the dead didn't use their eyes to observe external objects. The true eyes of the souls could reflect the truth of everything, even if there was no light in front of them. In this pitch-black world, if you closed your eyes and opened your heart, the entire world would reveal its true face to you, shocking even visitors from other dimensions. At every moment, this dark land without sunlight was trembling. However, it wasn't because the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Instead, it was a rhythm full of vitality. It was like a sleeping giant beast, and the rhythm of the earth's trembling was its breathing and heartbeat. Yes, this world was alive. It was breathing, moving, and growing. The first to step through the gate of the Hades was the endless river Styx, which flowed from the shadows of the void like water from heaven. Countless newborn souls drifted helplessly in the river. This was the origin of new reincarnation. At a bend in the river, the rapid flow of the river Styx suddenly stopped. There was a shoal covered in snow. Countless demons were busily working by the shoal. They waved their pitchforks and maces, driving the unconscious souls onto the shore. Who am I? Where am I? I'm John, a militia from Katy Village. I should have been killed by the Beastmen while I was patrolling. At the same time that he recovered his memories, the wound on his chest appeared. At the same time, there was also the arrow that pierced his body, constantly reminding him of the reality that he was already dead. However, the bestowal of the rules of the Hades allowed the souls that had lost their memories and self to return to their previous state. In the middle of the river Styx, the falling snow would cover their bodies. The newly formed bodies made of ice and snow would feel hunger, pain, and desire. Under the command of the demon soldiers, they would walk on the winding mountain path towards the palace in the mountains to welcome the final judgment that was destined to come. At the end of the mountain path, there was a wide obsidian gate with blurry words written on it. Behind the gate was a wide group of palaces. To walk towards those palaces, one had to first walk through a corridor made of mirrors. Hardadef walked along the corridor, but the reflection in the mirror was not his current appearance. It was the past, the present, and possibly the future. The one on the left was the one who played around with chickens and dogs when he was young, while the one on the right was the one who turned over a new leaf and became a militia, finding meaning in helping others. This was a famous product of hell in the future, the corridor of fate of good and evil. Here, the magic mirror that played with fate would pluck the strings of fate, and all sins and good karma would be displayed. And at the end of the corridor of mirrors was the first of the 4 halls of hell, the executor of good and evil karma on a scale, the balance hall. Upon entering the balance hall, one would discover that it was not a palace, but a boundless world. The brightly lit hall was filled with busy people, and the floor was carved with the Milky Way of fate. Devils were hurriedly working, and countless mirrors of fate kept flashing. Just memorizing the major events of the deceased as evidence for their judgment was enough to keep these novices busy. At this moment, the original god of fate, Catio, who should have been in control of this hall, was currently in an eternal slumber. He was currently being transformed by the laws of the Hades. And when he woke up, the divine concepts of good and evil balance and accusation would be added to the balance hall. The balance hall would finally welcome its true master. While Catio was in a deep sleep, the silver-robed judge was busy at the position where he should have been sitting. Not only that, in the 3 halls that had already been activated but weren't guarded by the gods, the silver-robed figure was also busy at the manager's position. You're doing so many jobs by yourself. Can you even ask for overtime pay? You're the final boss. Who can you ask for overtime pay from? Right now, the reason why I had the free time to comment to my system was because I, as the master of the Hades, had obtained some new abilities. The reason why I had the free time to chat was because I was now capable of having countless incarnations. It was quite a wondrous feeling to be able to simultaneously observe so many locations. Even more wondrous was that I could stand on the bodies of all the original sins and taunt the main gods without having to worry about being reduced to dust. Oh my, Donati's is so violent. He killed yet another incarnation. Yep, it should be said that it wouldn't matter even if he was reduced to dust. And so, as if I was playing a strategy game, I sent another incarnation over to continue provoking Donatis with words to interfere with their judgment and gather information. The current me was Wumian's Roland, the pillar of space, one of the 4 pillars of hell. I existed in the balance hall, as well as in the 7 hells. I was the Hades, and the Hades were me. Endless incarnations was my most useful yet most useless special ability. After all, these incarnations had 0 combat strength to speak of, but they allowed me to do many things. From a different perspective, unless both the Pillar of Law and the Pillar of Death collapsed, I would be undying. This was one of the special abilities that I had just obtained. Actually, as long as the Pillar of Death didn't collapse, the gods of the Hades would all be undying. Or, to put it more directly, how could the already dead existences in the Hades possibly die again? The gods of the Hades had to be dead. If they were alive, they would become dead the moment they chose to become a member of the Hades. As for the 4 pillar gods, they had to be reborn from the dead. They had to be the purest dead born in this world in order to become the 4 pillars of the Hades. This was the foundational rule of the earth elemental plane. For example, only elemental life forms could become elemental gods, and only dead gods could become the gods of the kingdom of the dead. Yep, there was no need to hide anything at this time. I was already dead, and a bento. When I used reverse God's descent to infuse my soul into Wumian's body, allowing my physical body to merge with my divine body, my physical body was corroded by the aura of the Hades. My original physical body had already sunk into a physiological state of eternal hibernation. The natural laws of the earth elemental plane didn't differentiate between friend and foe. At that moment, I was already biologically dead. Actually, I was already destined to die from the moment I entered the Hades. What? Not shocking enough? Too sudden? Who made the rule that a bento had to be slowly brewed up in several episodes? Or that it had to be emotional and tearful? I was already used to receiving bento. Receiving and vomiting bento over and over again would make me feel nauseous. Since this was already my 5th bento, there was no need to be so unreasonable. So many people have already died. It doesn't matter if I die. Fortunately, Wumian's was Sloth, a unique undead created from splitting off his soul. He completely fit the definition of a dead person and could directly merge with his current physical body. Otherwise, I would have had to first die in a mortal plane and then fill up my soul crystal. I didn't even know how long it would take for me to wake up, or if I could even wake up. It was likely that no one would be in charge of the construction of the Hades. Now that I had mastered the power of space in the Hades, I also had the ability to transform into a myriad of clones. This was a special ability that the God of Judgment, Wumian's, needed. Otherwise, just the endless undead judgment alone would be enough to tire him to death. Right now, this ability was the most convenient one for me. It allowed me to control the entire situation and have a bird's-eye view of the battlefield. I would also be able to fill in the gaps in time. More importantly, this ability to transform into clones would allow me to carry out my official duties in place of my comrades who are currently in a deep sleep, changing, assimilating, and carrying out the cycle of Hades. As long as the Hades were carrying out their duties and allowing the cycle of reincarnation to continue, not only would the Hades themselves become more complete and powerful, even the gods, warriors, and guards of the Hades would become stronger. This would be our support and source of power for a prolonged battle, as well as the key to victory that Ale had fought for us. Every time the Lord of Hades created a dossier of criminals, the sleeping Catio would obtain a portion of power, which would bring him one step closer to true awakening. And with every judgment, every cycle of reincarnation, and every time the law was carried out, I, as the Lord of Hades, the Lord of Law, and the God of Judgment, would naturally obtain a portion of power as well. Even the 7 kings of hell would naturally become stronger when those condemned were thrown into the infernos and their duties were carried out. Since the Ale plane had been able to produce more than 100 main gods in its entire history, there were currently more than 20 of them, which meant that there were main gods. Even at the beginning of creation, our Hades plane would naturally be able to produce main god-level existences as well. At this time, the bargaining chip that I had promised to a certain existence was naturally revealed. Anything that could be used to bribe powerful individuals would naturally require greater power and a higher status. The seventh hell's bestial desires purgatory was where Lust Share was stationed. Her opponent was also a main god-level existence, Sophocles the Deceiver. Share herself didn't have any powerful combat strength. She could only rely on the hell dragons under her command. And the seventh hell was where the hell dragons gathered. Yes, the hell dragons were a completely new species. They were the future envoys of the Hades, as well as the only existences that could freely enter and exit the Hades. Compared to the past, their bodies were much larger, and their dragon scales had become pitch black. However, nobody would mistake them for black dragons. The aura of death that filled the air around them was the foundational difference between them and ordinary dragons. Being able to travel through dimensions and not be affected by the environment was the strongest special ability of dragons to begin with. Meanwhile, the hell dragons of the Hades were capable of wandering between life and death. They would become the death gods and hell gods who traveled on land. As for their combat strength, it would be incomparable to what they had been in the past. I know that all dragons desire power. What I can give you is naturally endless power and the glory of being the ruler of a dimension. That's a power that's more than enough to kill even gods. You shall become the strongest dragon king. Your brethren shall become the strongest dragons. And so, the white dragon Sam consulted Roland's plan and confirmed that the reward was feasible. In order to change the fate of the white dragons, he joined Roland's faction, and the entire white dragon species became the hell dragons. However, he wasn't the most powerful dragons of the Hades. The true ruler of the Hades was the three-headed hell dragon Evelyn, who is currently fighting against the demon main god Sophocles the Deceiver. Apart from helping to heal Share, don't you want to have your own home and brethren? Of course, you'll also receive additional power and the status of the ruler of a dimension. You'll be 100 times more glorious than you are now. There were two hell dragon leaders. One of them was the former supreme immemorial white dragon Sam, while the other was the three-headed hell dragon Evelyn and her younger sisters. Currently, the main god Sophocles the Deceiver was actually at a disadvantage under the combined attacks of the hell dragons. Chapter 459. The creator goddess's power was limitless. Creating a world would bring about additional powers and abilities that could create events, distort karma and time, create main gods, and create new species. The creator goddess's power was also limited. No matter how excellent her parents were, or how strict her family's laws were, it would be impossible for her to control her children's achievements and growth. Even the creator goddess herself didn't know what she would become in the end. The Titan giants had been inconceivably powerful back in the day because the creator goddess had given them the power and ability to create. However, the Titan giants' original goal was for them to become the top craftsmen and artists. The demons that had been given the natural talents of evolution and combat were supposed to be the most outstanding warriors and dimensional guardians, but they ended up like that. Parents would only be able to give their children direction of growth. The creator goddess was slightly stronger and would be able to give them direction and natural talents as gifts. But what they would become in the end, whether or not their natural talents would be fermented into actual abilities, and what level an individual or species would reach would all depend on the individual species' development and how hard they worked. Nobody would know beforehand. Roland had given the hell dragons the power and responsibility of being the emissaries of the Hades. Just like how hell dragons would borrow the natural talents of dragons that had transmigrated to other dimensions to become the representative of the chaos abyss in the mortal plane, the hell dragons of the Hades would also become the messengers and representatives of the death gods and hell gods. And in order to fulfill this responsibility, the Hades plane gave the hell dragons the power to spread death. This was why the hell dragons would soon be called representatives of death, hell gods of the dead, and dragons of death. The hell dragons had curvaceous bodies that were even stronger than ordinary red dragons. Their translucent night wings made them seem like drifting nightmares. Pitch black mist surrounded them, and only their blood-red eyes shone with an abnormal light. This mist was actually a form of protection for others. As the incarnation of death, any weak life form in the mortal plane that saw the hell dragon's true bodies would likely instantly die. A large number of hell dragons surrounded the powerful demon lord and occasionally unleashed dragon breath attacks. Judging from the appearance of this slow, black mist ball breath, it didn't seem as domineering as the thunder flame dragon breath. However, only Sophocles himself knew that this hell dragon breath was far more dangerous and vicious than any other dragon breath. The law of death and the ability to die instantly. Looks like I've suffered a loss this time. The main gods were able to resist the invasion of the rule of death in the Hades by relying on their outstanding individual abilities. They had long been accustomed to fighting against the hostile plane laws, but it did not mean that they could ignore the power of the rule that invaded their bodies, especially when the power of the rule itself represented death. If an ordinary life form was corroded by this death aura, they would directly enter the Hades. Even if it was a main god, if they did not want to be corroded by the laws of the Hades and stay here forever, they should not take too much damage. With every attack, the deathly hell aura would connect to the Demon King's body like bone-covering flames. The Demon King's gigantic body became the best target, and the all-pervasive hell aura was transforming the Demon King into a demon lord. Sophocles the Deceiver was a demon who was the closest demon to the devils. He was only willing to help out because of the excellent conditions that Cynthia had offered him. The most valuable reward that the Chaos Abyss could offer was dimensional territory. A rich dimensional territory would mean tangible power and wealth, as well as an endless supply of souls. What would be the point of all this if he was bound to this dimensional territory and became the same species as his old nemesis? Even after fighting for so long, Sophocles had only been corroded to 1%. He was still far from being bound, but he was already spending most of his energy on dodging and defending. It was quite obvious that he was only doing his job and not doing his best. Safety was his #1 priority. However, every time Sophocles counterattacked, no matter if it was a natural magical or physical attack, a hell dragon would howl in pain and fall from the sky. This made Sam's heart ache. After all, most of the hell dragons here were his descendants, as well as his future kin. Yes, the hell dragons didn't have undying bodies. There would always be losses for every gain. Since the hell dragons had the special ability to leave the Hades, how could they possibly have the undying bodies unique to the Hades? As the messengers of the Hades, the hell dragons were born with the ability to summon and control undead souls. Large numbers of undead souls with undying bodies were summoned to attack Sophocles. What other place would have more powerful undead souls than the Hades? However, Sophocles was no idiot. When he discovered that these undead had low attack power compared to a main god and undying bodies, he unhesitatingly ignored his enemies and focused his attention on the hell dragons instead. In terms of direct combat strength, Sophocles was probably the weakest among the main gods, as he was skilled at scheming. However, he was still a main god-level demon main god with far superior combat strength. If it weren't for the fact that Sophocles had so many misgivings, he wouldn't have been suppressed so easily. When I focused most of my attention on Sophocles, I was pleasantly surprised to see the hell dragon's unexpected performance. Originally, I had considered that Cher wasn't skilled at direct combat, so I had assigned her the weakest main god and even had the hell dragons help her out. However, I never expected that the hell dragons would be so outstanding that they actually forced Sophocles into a passive state. Of course, if this battle continued, either the hell dragons would be unable to handle the losses and collapse, or Sophocles would be forced into a corner and reveal his true demonic nature, causing him to go on a killing spree. I didn't believe that these newborn hell dragons would truly be able to corrupt this main god. Perhaps we can have a chat. My voice reverberated in the empty space as the demon lord increased the intensity of his attacks. He suddenly tossed a magic spear through the air, directly striking down a giant dragon that was circling in the air. Then he used the chain at the end of the spear to drag the dragon down and swallowed it in one gulp. As he chewed, he glared at me with his dim yellow eyes. All of this happened the instant that I opened my mouth. I didn't even have time to save him. "You!" Sam roared angrily. However, he didn't counterattack for revenge. He was also a veteran. After his anger subsided, he instantly realized that he was innocent. The demon main god wasn't doing this because he was vicious by nature. Rather, it was because he seemed to be unafraid of continuing to fight. And this just happened to be the most powerful bargaining chip in a negotiation. This meant that the demon main god indeed wanted to negotiate. And if he continued to fight, the newborn hell dragons would suffer heavy losses. I shook my head. If Sam had charged forward, I would have actually thought more highly of him. "Fight for me again, my servant." I pointed at the dragon corpses on the ground, causing them to be corroded by hell energy and transformed into ghost dragons and bone dragons. The ice and Hades gave them even stronger physical bodies. The ghost dragons raised their heads and roared angrily, greatly boosting the hell dragons' morale. What could possibly be more reassuring than having a hell god standing behind you? Death wasn't the end. One more chance would be far more powerful than any reinforcements. Of course, the ghost dragons also lost most of the hell dragon's abilities and the special ability to escape from the Hades. However, this technique of mine gave Sophocles a lot of pressure. If these hell dragons ignored their own lives and continued to corrode his physical body, it was likely that he would forever be trapped here. "Perhaps we can have a chat." I slowly nodded. Although I appeared cold, I was actually quite satisfied. Wasn't the purpose of splitting up the enemy in order to obtain an opportunity to split up, bribe, and destroy the enemy? How much willpower could the hell dragons possibly have when they were no longer under the dimensional will's supervision? This was especially true when I had enough bargaining chips to bribe the enemy. As long as I could achieve some results in my negotiation, even if the hell dragons were willing to remain verbally neutral, I would be able to use a portion of the hell dragon's combat strength to deal with the other hell dragons. The final advantage would snowball like a rolling snowball. I could only obtain the final victory. Otherwise, even if I killed the hell dragons, it would still be doubtful how much I would gain. From the very start, my biggest goal in splitting up the hell dragons was to obtain an opportunity to have a chat. Of the 7 main gods, only 2 were willing to have a chat with me. I didn't see any possibility of negotiating with the other 5. That was why the same thing was happening on another battlefield. In the 4th hell's boundless greed, Harlois was currently facing the god of wisdom. However, she was all smiles as she chatted with the hell lord, drinking tea and playing chess. She had no intention of fighting at all. The reason? Actually, it had to do with Harlois' identity. She was a descendant of the Gold Elves, the only true descendant of the Gold Elves. Meanwhile, the god of wisdom, Calamandas, was a half-elf. Considering his ancient birth, it was obvious that he lived in an era when the Gold Elves were in power. Half of his bloodline came from the Haletum generation, while the other half came from the low-level Wild Elves. The Wild Elves gave him endless knowledge and memories. Although the Wild Elves treated him with great hostility, he managed to avoid the destruction of the Haletum generation. It was said that the Gold Elf Emperor of the Gold Elves had done much to help Calamandas avoid being hunted down by the main gods. The reason he used was that Calamandas was a member of the Gold Elves. As for whether it was because of true friendship or for the sake of the Haletum generation's technology, I didn't know for now. But at the very least, the god of wisdom did indeed owe the Gold Elves a favor. All right then, I admit that I had heard this rumor from Harlois. This god of wisdom, and books had indeed secretly taken care of Harlois in the past to repay the Elven Emperor's favor. Otherwise, the elf main gods would have long since eradicated Harlois. How could they possibly allow Harlois, who was a descendant of the Gold Elves, to be so active in the mortal plane and cause so much trouble? Of course, as the price, the god of wisdom wouldn't possibly give Harlois too much help. When Harloise told me about their relationship and asked to communicate with Calamandas of her own volition, I was quite delighted. Having a good personal relationship was doubtlessly the best way to start a negotiation. Perhaps we can have a discussion. And so, another Womian's incarnation appeared in front of the god of wisdom and Harloise. This time, I did my best to force out a smile. However, Womian's first sentence was already quite unexpected. Negotiate? Of course, that's exactly what I'm here for. But first, let me meet with my people who also come from the Haletum generation. Chapter 460. Not every main god-level existence could be reasoned with. Many powerful existences would never reason with the weak. Or, to be more direct, they didn't even treat the weak as existences they could communicate with. In the beginning, demons weren't actually evil. Back when I was on the River Styx, LS words rang in my ears, but I couldn't use them as a reference. After all, in Hei's dimension, demons had long since become infamous. Is being weak a sin? If it was any other species, they might be able to discuss the relationship between life philosophy and social reality with you. At the very least, they would give you an acceptable answer, such as the weak need to be protected by the strong. But for demons, they would use their actions to tell you, the weak? Of course, they'll only become food and toys. In the world of demons, the strong preyed on the weak. Being weak was an even greater sin. Only possessing wealth without the power to protect, it was basically a shortcut to death. There were only two paths in a demon's life. One would become stronger, or one would accidentally fall and become food or a stepping stone for other demons. And for main god-level demons, it would be nearly impossible to advance any further. That was because the will of the Chaos Abyss would always be above them. Although they were able to break free from part of her control, as long as they continued living in the chaotic Chaos Abyss, it would be impossible for them to completely break free from her control. At this moment, the dimensional invaders from the Chaos faction discovered what was truly special about this dimension after a short moment of confusion. This wasn't another dimension derived from the Hei'i plane. This was a newly created mortal plane, and for the Chaos faction, a newly created mortal plane would be like a piece of super juicy meat. A newly created mortal plane would be a rare opportunity that would only appear once in tens of thousands of years. Just obtaining a portion of an ordinary plane's resources and natural laws would allow them to become even more powerful. A complete mortal plane would be their only chance to surpass their eternal master after countless years. That's right, there wasn't a single demon who didn't want to become even more powerful. Devouring and evolving had already become their law of survival. As long as there was a chance, how could they not rebel? No matter what the final negotiation with Sophocles the Deceiver was, my best hope was that he would temporarily remain neutral. As for the other demon main gods, there wasn't even need to try. But there was one who was special, and that was my foolish younger brother. What? Nothing much. I just wanted to say, a certain older brother who had already finished his classic line couldn't continue speaking. After all, what followed after was ridicule. You're still too weak. Live on in an ugly way. It seemed that he was the one who was weaker now. If Cavendish learned from a certain younger brother and taunted me right from the start, then attacked me right away, I would most likely be sent flying with a single slap. Even if I wouldn't die, it would still be too embarrassing. I tossed Womian's mask to the side. Cavendish was still cooking his fish, but I had come in my true form. After all, demons were already quite difficult to deal with. Adding on Cavendish, this was definitely the worst possible combination. I had never underestimated Cavendish. Ever since he was young, he had never liked to use his brain. He liked to be straightforward, but it was not that he was stupid. On the contrary, he had his own way of doing things and attitude. If we can solve it with our fists, why use our brains? If we think too much, our movements will slow down. Actions were faster than thoughts. He used his physical body to learn through practical combat. He grew at a high speed, but he didn't lack any foundational knowledge. He had a straightforward appearance that far surpassed his age, yet he still had the hot-bloodedness of a youth. He was sly when he needed to be, and he always unknowingly obtained the love of others and people. Fine then, I admit that he was slightly more popular with women than I was. Just say what you want to say. Fine, not just a little, but a lot, all right? Based on the number of spouses I've already obtained, the multiplier is probably several tens of thousands of times. All right, I shouldn't have commented on you like this. No, since your base number is 0, the answer should be infinity. All right, Goddess of Order, thank you for your accurate calculations, but please shut up for now. Getting back to the main topic, Cavendish had always been quite popular compared to me, who was often absent from Definder. His military achievements against the Demon Abyss had also earned him the recognition of the military. If it wasn't for that incident, Cavendish would have been the best ruler in the Mist Kingdom, as I had planned to be a holy knight for the rest of my life. I wasn't dissatisfied with such a life at all, although I would sometimes complain about it. Yep, I was quite envious of him. Just like how people who thought too much would sometimes envy those who were pure and happy, they would always unknowingly grow up and obtain the trust and approval of others as they grew up, finally achieving success. You have to work so hard in order to achieve what you want. But he can suddenly achieve something similar on a whim, and he's always able to receive the love and attention of his parents and friends. Even if you do better than him, this is so unfair. Do you think that bad boys always receive more attention? It seems that I should learn to be bad as well. When I was young, I had quite a few such thoughts and made quite a few moronic jokes. However, it didn't affect the relationship between us brothers. After all, facing such a naive brat, I didn't know how to get angry even if I wanted to. Roland, what kind of condiments do you like? I have everything from the Blood Tribe's Holy Blood condiments to the Inferno Demon's Abyss condiments. I can tell just from the name that there's something wrong with it. I don't want any condiments. By the way, the battle is about to begin. Are you really that uninterested? Yep, I'm quite interested in eating fish. I spent at least 30 years preparing this pot of fish in order to successfully scam it. You don't even know how troublesome it was to fish him. I collected 7 or 8 god equipment and killed off a dozen demon lords. You're making it sound like cooking a dish to kill off a demon lord with schemes. Don't tell me that you really killed him for the sake of eating fish. Cavendish looked at me in astonishment, as if I had asked an idiotic question. Of course it's for the sake of eating. He's the largest fish in the entire universe. He'll definitely taste delicious. Otherwise, why would I bring you along to share with you? At that moment, I knew that he was telling the truth. Even though he had already entered the Chaos Abyss, he was still living as simply as before. I was truly envious. Yep, I was only envious, not jealous, because it was impossible to hate such a pure fellow. However, I was quite skilled at dealing with such a pure idiot. It would be useless to stop them when they were inexplicably angry. If I didn't like them, all I needed was a bit of rational ice cube. About that, I've also heard that he's one of the oldest demon lords in the Chaos Abyss. In other words, he's as old as a living fossil. Even fish that's 100 years old is old and astringent. Delicious? Aren't you overthinking things? And so, my hand that was stirring the pot instantly stopped. Cavendish turned around with a clattering sound. The resentment in his eyes and the "why didn't you tell me earlier" made me want to raise my head and laugh out loud. All right, I laughed loudly, laughed wildly, laughed so hard that I held my stomach, laughed so hard that tears came out. As expected, happiness has to be built on someone else's misfortune. As I wiped away my tears, I took out my gavel and codex. Since this pot of fish was about to be cooked, and since Cavendish said that fish can only be eaten if you're not dead, it was time for us to get serious. This was an annoying tacit understanding between brothers that didn't require words. But then, I suddenly stopped as I recalled a piece of information that I needed to tell you. Right? Did you know about Cynthia? And about our souls? About our souls being the same person? Of course I knew about it. I knew about it before I entered the Chaos Abyss. Otherwise, why would I leave my frigid maw behind for you? Besides, even if I didn't know about it before, do you really think that I wouldn't understand about souls after becoming a demon? Indeed, how could Cavendish not realize that I was the first to break the record for becoming a demon main god? And souls were the eternal goal of all demons. You're still as sharp as ever. Is this your wild instincts? I'm so envious of you. You're envious of me? Huh. I'm actually quite envious of you. Envious of me? Yep. I'm not as smart as you are. You always have so many clever ideas. Nothing is too difficult for you. Back in the day, Kelly and little Sarah loved to follow you around and listen to your interesting stories. Dad also always praised you for being smart and capable. Cavendish awkwardly scratched his head as he said such embarrassing words. Since I can't win against you even if I use my brain, I might as well not use it at all and just use my body's instincts. I never expected that I would get used to it. TSK. Even though we're clearly two separate entities of the same soul, why can't I come up with any clever ideas? My intelligence must have been eaten away by you. To think that his familiar old face would actually blush. Hey, is this still the arrogant, fearless, and shameless human brother of mine who doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth? At this moment, I didn't even know what to say. Perhaps this was proof of an old saying, what you long for the most will never appear. Sigh. Finally, all my exclamations transformed into a single sigh. I took a deep breath and took a step forward, tossing all my random thoughts to the back of my mind. That was because I was only here to fight. The annoying tacit understanding between brothers let us know that since we made our own choices, there was nothing to regret. Perhaps today would be our first serious battle. Perhaps it would also be our last. This was also the reason why we brothers, who were always so awkward with each other, would say what we truly wanted. As for persuasion? How would that be possible? The only similarity between us brothers was probably our stubborn brains. I had my own ideals, while he had his own choices. Since he even knew about Cynthia's matter, and he had already reached the peak of the Chaos faction, his choices were all from his heart. Let's not insult each other with unnecessary words. How are you doing in the Chaos Abyss? That's such a damn place. There's killing all day, but it's my favorite place. Yep, it's my current home. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I love that damn place the most. I knew that even Cynthia wouldn't be able to control you. Your bastard personality is indeed quite suitable for the Chaos Abyss. Rebuilding Donglon and Sluir was all that Cavendish could remember about the past. The current him loved the turbid yet lively Chaos Abyss. He loved the Chaos Abyss and the law of the jungle that Cynthia represented. He was a maniacal player who loved this world the most. As for me, I hated this cruel yet beautiful world. Our beliefs and personalities were different. After 300 years of fermentation, these two originally similar souls finally walked down completely different paths. The two brothers looked at each other and suddenly laughed together in an indescribable manner. The next instant, a silver holy war hammer viciously clashed against a dim yellow magic sword. Since we can play now, let's see whose love is deeper. Roland, please don't die. I intend to play a few more times. Roland's dim yellow eyes were filled with the joy of battle, but all he received was his older brother's ridicule as always. My foolish younger brother. F***ck me, don't hit my face. The war hammer and magic sword clashed against each other, creating a fiery glow that illuminated the pitch-black depths of hell. What was illuminated were two excited and delighted faces. Chapter 461. I swung my war hammer and viciously charged over, only to be knocked back at an even faster speed. Difference in strength. Before I could react, the distance between us was instantly shortened. Carwin's was already in front of me. His sword and hammer clashed again, and I was sent flying again. Difference in speed. Our two weapons clashed together with an earth-shattering sound. The entire terrain changed as a shockwave covered the sky. Even the souls of the dead were directly shattered into pieces. I suddenly stomped on the ground, my frightening brute strength causing me to leave 2 deep ditches in the ground. My body received more than 10 cuts from Roland's sword energy, but I also stopped being blown away. Just as I stabilized myself and didn't even have the time to finish charging up my war hammer, that dim yellow magic sword soundlessly struck my arm. If it wasn't for the fact that I had summoned my dragon armor in time, both my arm and war hammer would have been destroyed. Only now did I see Cavendish's sword swing. The complete version of the Sword of Karma? I've only just grasped the basics. Damn it, there's even a difference in sword techniques. I sucked in a cold breath the moment we exchanged blows. Although I had expected that there would be a difference in power levels, I hadn't expected that the difference would be so great. As the Abyss Prince, I could accept that Roland's basic stats were higher than mine in all aspects. However, I found it rather difficult to accept that there was a difference in power levels between our sword techniques. Damn it, there's still such a huge difference even with my cheat. Currently, I was buffed by Hades and this Inferno. Hades was my home turf, so if I purely looked at energy levels, I should be about the same as Cavendish. However, when I fought him, I felt like I was being beaten up, and this difference was all around. But when I thought about it carefully, it was only natural. Even if our natural talents were about the same, and we were both of the same age, I'd spent a lot of time focusing on law, magic, and divine arts. Meanwhile, as the Abyss Prince, Cavendish only needed to focus on fighting. Originally, he was already far superior to me in terms of pure natural talent for fighting, but now that I was distracted, the result was that the gap between us in all aspects kept growing wider and wider. I instinctively noticed that Cavendish was only warming up at this level. Furthermore, the basic stats that he displayed were still above Amelia, who was the most ridiculous in this aspect. I leaned against his war hammer and half-knelt to catch my breath. I was on full alert, but Cavendish suddenly stopped chasing after me with a bored expression. "Brother, are you sure you can do this? How about I give you a few more decades so that you can go back and practice? Of course, I can't keep these Hades or my mom will scold me." "Mom? Cynthia's mother? Don't you know how our souls came to be? Where do you think the child of destiny came from? Do you think the two goddesses would casually choose a soul? That can't be. Your expression means that you really don't know. In that case, brother, I think that you shouldn't trust the person on your body too much. Perhaps she wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the complete truth." Cavendish's words raised new suspicions, but now wasn't the time to think too much about it. I needed my system to help me win this battle. I only lightly said to my system in my mind, "I need an explanation." Then, I refocused my attention on Cavendish. Competing in brute strength against the Chaos faction was foolish to begin with. Competing in brute strength against Cavendish was just me being foolish. Just like in the past, since I couldn't win in a direct fight, I would use underhanded methods. Honestly, Cavendish, don't underestimate me. Do you really think that I'll compete in brute strength against an idiot like you? I raised my war hammer high in the air. The icy, holy hammer glowed brilliantly, becoming the only source of light in this world. This was the purest light, the light of purification that represented hope, protection, and salvation. Holy light, do you see this enemy? Yep, it's that idiotic-looking muscular trap. Don't you feel guilty saying that? Don't we look the same? Fine, you actually turned your face into a skeleton? You win. I took a deep breath and swung my holy pure war hammer once more. Every time I swung my god equipment war hammer, I swung it with all my might. My technique was simple and direct, but it was always filled with power. The holy light that brushed past my holy pure war hammer would explode like lightning. Unlike long swords or two-handed swords, the war hammer was a blunt weapon that didn't require much technique to use. There weren't many tricks to use it. The war hammer's true attack power would always come from its accumulated kinetic energy. However, its penetrative damage was especially effective against thick-skinned existences like the heavily armored knight and demons, as well as against zombies and skeletons, which were undying creatures that weren't afraid of stabbing or cutting. That was why the war hammer was the favorite weapon of the Holy Knight, who was always fighting against these tough, canned creatures. It was simple, violent, and effective. In just a short month of training, the Holy Knight was able to grasp the basics of how to use this warhammer. Light of the Brink, the Guardian Warhammer of Dawn Envoys. Judging from its outer appearance, it was basically a large silver warhammer. This ancient warhammer was a popular model from more than 1,000 years ago. Its appearance and usage were completely different from the current Meteor's side-style warhammer. The side-style warhammer had a sharp end and a blunt end. Apart from being a temporary sharp weapon, the sharp end of the warhammer was especially effective at opening canned creatures. Meanwhile, the blunt end of the warhammer was used to injure people with shockwaves. That was why the warhammer would often have a sharp edge and a metallic coating. As for this ancient warhammer, not only did it have no sharp edge or coating, even the blunt end of the warhammer would be specially polished to reduce its damage. The warhammer itself wasn't that heavy either. After cutting off a portion of the warhammer, its kinetic energy damage would be greatly reduced, and its attack power would plummet. However, this wasn't because the Holy Knight was showing mercy to the enemy. A Holy Knight was no vegetarian monk. A qualified warrior would know that showing mercy to the enemy on the battlefield would be the equivalent of suicide. Light of the Brink didn't have a warhammer that increased its damage because it didn't need one at all. Holy Light, purify this idiot. The god equipment warhammer gathered an endless amount of light. A rune representing Holy Light appeared on the originally glowing side of the warhammer. Then, all the light gathered again. When all the light disappeared, the rune transformed into a crystal-like physical existence. The golden crystal-like polyhedron was the hammer's head of light. A pair of wings of light mysteriously appeared on my back. The ground and darkness around me were all purified. This was the holy hammer's power leaking out. A gust of holy light blew across the land. Even Cavendish furrowed his eyebrows. He, the Abyss Prince, felt pain that he hadn't felt in a very long time. This ancient warhammer's only ability was to purify and refine its user's holy light even further. It would finally materialize holy light energy, transforming it into the light of order that was capable of destroying all chaos. Unlike its name of Guardian Warhammer, this holy light warhammer that had been passed down for countless generations was a pure offensive weapon. Countless powerful existences from other dimensions and the lower planes had died to it. Its materialized holy light crystal was the worst nightmare for all non-order life forms. The best way to protect is to destroy such evil. From a certain standpoint, those old fellows weren't too old-fashioned after all. But, as I touched the silver warhammer, the older holy knights transmitted their beliefs to me. This was the determination of the holy knights who had worked so hard to protect their own kind back in the uncivilized era. Even though my heart was boiling with fighting spirit, I shook my head. This wasn't the holy light that I desired, nor was this the light of salvation that Estrada desired. Are all demons and undead enemies? But now, such a concept is rather outdated. If we still have such a concept, the holy war will never end. I took a deep breath as my eyes were filled with silver light. I gently caressed this god equipment warhammer and poured the dimensional laws of the Hades into it. In the name of the Lord of the Hades, Womian's Roland, I bless you in becoming one of the 4 dark artifacts of the Hades. From now on, your name shall no longer be the Light of Despair, the Guardian Warhammer of the Dawn Envoys. You shall be the Light of Salvation, the Warhammer of Hope of the Light Envoys. Names also represented power. The original 4 elements of wind, fire, water, and earth had already become the foundation of this world. The new 4 elements dimensional laws required 4 vessels to contain them. What would be more suitable than this warhammer that represented holy light? The power of the Hades dimensional laws rewrote this warhammer. The golden holy light of purification was filtered and modified, and the final result was a faint golden light. Sigh. Even though I could clearly sense the tremendous power within this warhammer, I could only sigh helplessly. Even though I was helpless, it was still a sigh. As one of the foundations of the new generation, the holy light that represented purification in the past was far too extreme. The Holy Church and the Southern Sect conflict was also due to the conflict over the definition of holy light. And the fastest way to make the god of holy light's statue collapse was to create a substitute. Estrada must die. I needed to redefine holy light. I needed to replace the god of holy light's teachings with pure holy light's definition. I needed to transform the light from the heavens into the light of mortals. I needed to transform the power of faith into the foundational foundation of this new world and the power to protect it. Because holy light must be saved. In the original game's history, as the Holy War progressed, holy light would become more and more important in battle. The name of holy light would be repeatedly chanted, and he would become stronger and stronger. But in the end, his strength would instead cause the destruction of the world. And now, at the peak of the Hades, a golden tower of holy light was glowing brilliantly. An ancient soul was about to reopen its eyes. One of the new 4 pillars of holy light was about to awaken. He was the incarnation of holy light, but he wasn't the god of holy light. He would also carry out his duties as the server of holy light, but he wouldn't interfere with mortals' decisions. From now on, the mortals would have even more obvious differences in their views of holy light and incarnations. The southern sect's believers of pure holy light would receive the protection of the true god of the Hades, while the Holy Church and the god of holy light would both meet their doom. That's right, he was the savior of holy light, Estrada. Unlike the other 4 pillars of holy light, the pillar of holy light didn't have any other choice. He would need to rely on the power of holy light to reach the level of a god. And as a member of the Hades, he would also have to die. After thinking about it, the only possible candidate was the strongest. That was why I wrote that letter, while Estrada decided to toss his remnant soul into a soul crystal. The undead can even use holy light? As expected, that idiot lighthouse of holy light is broken. Cavendish seemed to see through everything. The undead referred to me, as well as me, who was about to awaken as the incarnation of holy light. However, I only found it amusing. The newly born holy light represented salvation, hope, and protection. His natural enemies had been rewritten. The undead were no longer his enemies. Weakening your own power on the battlefield? Roland, is your brain broken as well? However, the price for this was that the law of purification would definitely weaken. Even if this would bring hope for peace in the future, the weakening of the power of purification would still be an actual weakening on the battlefield. What's 334,234 times 324,242? You don't even know how to multiply 6 digits? I should have started with addition for you. Let's use facts to see whose brain is broken. Although I knew that I wasn't willing to admit defeat, I could tell from the feedback from the battle that the power of holy light had decreased by at least 30% against demons. However, this didn't mean that I would become weaker. I looked up at the sky and smiled. Now then, let's look above us. A dim golden light landed on my body. This was the pure holy light of the Tower of Holy Light. This was the pure holy light that represented salvation and protection. Estrada's final moment of salvation was the light of hope. This was also the foundation of the holy light of the Hades. Purification? No, the Hades were filled with undead. What meaning would the holy light of purification have? After Estrada's explanation, the core of the holy light was salvation. The holy light would guide the direction of hope and salvation in the pitch-black Hades. It would allow countless souls to atone for their sins and have the possibility of starting all over again. As the Tower of Holy Light's light landed, a large amount of holy light filled my body. The pure holy light illuminated the darkness of the inferno. As the master of the Hades, Womian's was the main axis that connected all of the Hades. He was also one of the 4 pillar gods, the head of the 4 halls of the Hades, and the Hell King of the heartless inferno of the 7 hells. This definitely wasn't the reason why I could use the holy light of salvation in the Hades. However, this battle hammer was a holy light battle hammer that I had obtained from one of the 4 pillars who was about to awaken. It was the key for me to carry out my duties as one of the 4 pillars. The pure power of holy light and the power of law boiled within my body. This was the power of the 2 pillars of the Hades. At this moment, the rampaging power gathered on my body, and 6 holy light wings were forcefully forced out from my back. I could sense that, in terms of power alone, I was now on the same level as Cavendish. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, however, a sudden explosion attracted our attention. The incarnation of the god of holy light suddenly appeared in front of me. However, its eyes didn't seem to even notice our existence. It was simply staring upwards. That's the incarnation of the god of holy light. The large crater on the surface of the inferno doubtlessly meant that the god of holy light had actually gone all out to break through the inferno's dimensional wall and jumped here from another inferno. Judging from the god of holy light's ethereal form, it was obvious that he had used up a tremendous amount of divine power in order to break through the dimensional wall. The next instant, the god of holy light transformed into a pair of golden wings of light and flew towards the tunnel that had just been opened. The top of the tunnel was where the Tower of Holy Light was located. The god of holy light sensed the gravest threat to him. He unhesitatingly abandoned everything and decided to destroy the newly born Tower of Holy Light at all costs. He was going to destroy the new pillar of holy light. Chapter 462. From a certain standpoint, nobody could ignore the god of holy light. After all, he was the strongest main god, and the reason why the Order faction and Chaos faction were able to maintain a balance. Yes, nobody could deny that the god of holy light was the strongest existence in the entire world. It seemed inconceivable that a main god who wasn't even 2,000 years old would be able to suppress all the immemorial gods. But just thinking about how many regions and countries the holy light was involved in, it was understandable. More than 70% of the human population believed in the holy light. Due to the human's fertility and the human country's strength, the god of holy light occupied around 30% of He's power of faith. This continued for 1,700 years, with more than 30 generations. Unlike the previous generation of elven gods, who split their power of faith among themselves, the most devout and chosen souls would become the god of holy light's power after they died. His divine kingdom would likely forever be overloaded, with countless souls providing him with the power of faith. This had been going on ever since the last holy war. This was an incredibly frightening amount of power of faith. Compared to the previous generation of elven gods, the god of holy light's power of faith was probably 10 times or even 100 times more than the previous generation of elven gods. That was because humans were far more advanced in terms of reproduction and the rate at which they changed generations. Their souls cycled countless times faster, so it was only natural that they would have far more power of faith. The short-lived species couldn't compare to the long-lived species in terms of power and intelligence. However, if you looked at it as the god's bread, the advantage of having a shorter lifespan and faster growth would be far too obvious. By the way, humans had complex emotions and personalities, which meant that their faith contained far too many obsessions and emotions. This made the taste and nutrition of the god of holy light's bread even better than the elves. Humans created the god of holy light. Currently, he was inconceivably powerful. Even his incarnation was still at the main god level. In terms of pure power, even the creator goddess of holy light might not have more power than him. This was a coincidence as well as a necessity. This was a miracle created by both the humans and the previous generation's child of fate, Car Roland. However, this was a problem for us. Such a powerful chess piece would definitely be able to influence the entire game. We had always been evaluating his position. His inconceivably powerful strength came at a price. From a certain standpoint, faith was also a shard of his soul. While the memories and emotions contained within were nutritious, they weren't that easy to digest. The amount of power of faith he collected surpassed all of his predecessors in history, but it also made it impossible for him to have a sense of self. However, there were many types of people without a sense of self. Like a machine-like mechanical judgment, they could independently choose things that were beneficial to them. Or had he already become a part of the holy light and was unable to make any judgment? Or he would be assimilated by the source of order and become a puppet-like fighter. In the situation and position, he was in also decided what choice he would make at the crucial moment. Would he follow the definition of purification and fight the Chaos faction to the bitter end? Or was it purely a self-serving machine that prioritized its own interests? Perhaps it would simply not do anything from the beginning to the end and only exist as a divine power server. That's why we've always been carefully testing him. The Northland's light and darkness differences, the Church of Pure Holy Light, and Estrada's choices have all slowly touched upon his bottom line and how he should respond. Finally, we've determined his position. He's already become the source of order subordinate? That's the worst possible answer. Just now, I used the Hammer of Redemption as a catalyst to borrow power from the Tower of Holy Light. At the same time, I also opened up a dimensional door to the Tower of Holy Light. This dimensional door revealed the coordinates of the Tower of Holy Light, which also gave the god of Holy Light's incarnation an opportunity. The Inferno was separated by the concept of space. It was impossible to traverse it with one's feet. The god of Holy Light forcefully broke through the dimensional barrier. Even though he lost a large amount of divine power, he still managed to fly up into the sky. Not only did you lose your sense of self, you even instinctively strengthened yourself and became a pure tool of order. As the previous generation's child of fate, you've truly failed miserably. It's super embarrassing. Right now, the source of order's useful tool had already gotten close to the Tower of Holy Light. As long as it destroyed the Tower of Holy Light, 1/4 of the Hades would come to an end, while Roland would remain the only incarnation of Holy Light. Roland, open your eyes. Fate is watching you. My angry roar echoed in the air. However, this wasn't just a verbal curse. This was the god equipment's reputation. My indescribable anger transformed into an envoy of misfortune that appeared in front of Roland. Roland's main body was unable to catch up, but as he was the ruler of space in this world, an incarnation blocked his path. Even if his incarnation was torn apart in the next instant, he had already activated unpredictable fate. Unpredictable fate. High-level god equipment. Staff. This pitch-black staff was a high-level god equipment that came from the god of fate. Fate's incarnation of scales and punishment had strengthened it even further. The god equipment's original curse of misfortune had become even more deadly. Third ability. Fate is watching you. Choose a target and lower their luck stat. The luck that they lose will be added to yours. This ability will last for 2 hours. This ability ignores all magic immunity and magic resistance. Even true gods are unable to resist it. Note, this ability can only be used once on a target. After that, the target will be immune to it for the rest of their lives. The high-level god equipment's curse instantly arrived. The incoming black light wrapped around Roland's incarnation and disappeared without a trace in the next instant. It seemed that the curse didn't have any effect. However, something was silently changing in the karmic cycle created by the invisible chains. A second incarnation wearing a god equipment crown appeared above his head. His target was the Holy Light incarnation that was currently attacking him. Stars, bring destruction to my enemies. Patricia's protection. High-level god equipment. Crown. 7th ability. Starlight summoning. Summon countless stars to descend and deal a destructive attack to your surroundings with you as the center. Number of uses, 1 per month. The next instant, the entire sky turned into night. The pure power of moonlight transformed into a fatal meteor shower that began a destructive attack. The meteors transformed from divine power should have attacked randomly, but under the guidance of fate, they kept changing directions. They arced through the sky in strange arcs. Some flew in a straight line, some curved lines, and some even flew backwards. But no matter which direction they flew in, there was a series of explosions as they all struck Roland's incarnation, who had already made evasive maneuvers. My luck stat test that year was once again proven to be correct. As long as one's luck was extremely bad, even a random rock thrown into the sky would cause someone to be unlucky. If one's luck was extremely bad, it was likely that 11 out of 10 rocks would be hit. The divine power of falling starlight was Patricia's ace in the hole. Its power even surpassed her usual full power attack. Not to mention that Roland's luck was already in the negatives, as well as my super high luck the damage I dealt was at least 10 times higher than normal. My defensive barrier shattered after the first few meteors hit it. The continuous chain of attacks caused Roland's incarnation, which was already exhausted to begin with, to start collapsing. But the next instant, the holy light incarnation gathered into a ball. The outer layer of the incarnation was peeled off and transformed into what looked like an arm. It even made a tossing motion. Split? No. After splitting, the original giant-sized incarnation became a sphere that was less than 1 meter in diameter. However, the amount of energy it gathered became even greater. The reaction of reaching the point of condensation doubtlessly indicated that it was even prepared to self-destruct in order to completely destroy the Tower of Holy Light. You shameless bastard. Die. The Holy Light bomb was already right in front of the Tower of Holy Light. If I didn't use my trump card now, I wouldn't have another chance. I grit my teeth, and the next instant, a clone appeared in front of the Holy Light ball with a white rose. And then, the white rose bloomed. The scene next to the river Styx replayed itself. It was also a main god-level incarnation, but the result was exactly the same. LS White Rose. Mystical item, top-level god equipment. Effect, directly causes the chosen target to die. System notification. Yep, it's that simple. There's no other effect. But trust me, even a main god wouldn't want to be chosen by this rose. My system's previous notification was correct. El had spent countless years to create these 3 roses of death. These roses of death were the embodiment of the concept of death in this world. Even a main god wouldn't be able to withstand such a power. But unlike other trump cards of god equipment, this strongest trump card was a mystical item that was a consumable. If Ale was still here, he would be able to recharge the Rose of Death. But now that the Rose of Death didn't have a true master, it could only helplessly transform into drifting petals in the air. Of course, Ale also took the Holy Light incarnation with him. I had continuously used up 2 main god-level main gods, yet my divine power still hadn't significantly decreased. The god of Holy Light's power had far surpassed common sense. And even if I was able to survive this current crisis, just the grudge I had against Ale, and I meant that we were destined to become mortal enemies. Sigh, and you say that I'm rash and impulsive? I think that you're the rash one, Roland. I heaved a sigh of relief as I watched the golden light dissipate in the air. But then, I heard a sigh behind me that gave me goosebumps. Damn, I used up all my trump cards in one go. I turned around, and as expected, I saw Cavendish's displeased expression. For that moment, I had actually forgotten about Cavendish. This was doubtlessly a type of condescension. No wonder he had such a displeased expression right now. I was intending on giving him a surprise attack. Yep, from the very start, I had never intended to have a direct head-on fight against him. The Chaos faction's advantage in brute strength was far too obvious. I had only hoped to stall him and then use my god equipment to ambush him. First, I would use curses such as lowering one's luck. Then, I would use an attack magic to weaken and cancel out the enemy's defensive abilities. Finally, I would use an attack that would instantly kill the enemy. This was a classic Dragon Slayer combo from a mage. It would be especially effective against thick-skinned targets. And the original target of this god equipment combo had been Cavendish. Compared to other demon main gods, Cavendish was smaller in size and would be completely focused on fighting, making him the perfect target for ambushes. In the end, I panicked and threw all my prepared combo attacks at the god of Holy Light. Now, I could only grit my teeth and continue fighting against my younger brother who had an unfriendly expression. Fortunately, it was the god of Holy Light who was charging at me. Cavendish was quite happy to see him being attacked. If it had been any other demon main god, it was likely that it would have been 2 against 1. But before we could reignite the flames of war, the entire heartless purgatory started shaking violently once more. The large hole in the ground suddenly exploded again, and a gigantic creature suddenly poked out from the smoke. This was the god of Holy Light's original opponent. Envy? The Borealis that had just rushed out of the Ravager's purgatory was currently in a sorry state. Most of the ship's body and exterior had been melted, and large amounts of debris kept falling down. It seemed like it would crash at any moment. It would seem that I've arranged the worst opponent for you. It was easy to see the main stats of the attacking main god. The most troublesome one was the god of Holy Light's incarnation. The original version of Holy Light represented purification and was the natural enemy of the undead. No matter which Hell King it was, they would all be countered by it. And so, I decided to make an arrangement that was similar to Tianji's horse race. I had the weakest of the 7 original sins, envy, Marsalit, stall the god of Holy Light. Of course, I had arranged for the weakest god of Holy Light, envy, because the god of Holy Light was only an incarnation and had low intelligence. He would be the slowest to see through the mysteries of this world. Yet, I hadn't expected that he would go berserk just because he sensed the existence of the Tower of Holy Light. But now, it would seem that not only had Marsalit's main body been heavily injured, the god of Holy Light's incarnation had also been the first to see through the mysteries of this world. After discovering the Tower of Holy Light, he unhesitatingly attacked. This seemed to have been the wrong choice. Marsalit's arrival also made it seem like he wasn't at such a disadvantage. At the very least, he had directly kicked out a main god. At the very least, I was now fighting 2 against 1, and my advantage was accumulating. Envy's own abilities were quite unique. He needed someone to control him in order to use his strongest abilities. And as long as he had enough time, his combat strength wouldn't be any lower than the other original sins. In that case, take a look at Envy Marsalit's true. Halfway through his arrogant words, he was stunned. The message from his avatar was the grievous news from the battlefield. The Hell of Pride has been broken through, and Omar was actually sealed away after being seriously injured. Damned Lord of Putrefaction. Chapter 463. The news of Omar's defeat surprised me greatly. He was definitely no weakling among the 7 original sins. The undead knight I sent to fight against him were all brave and skilled in battle. Pride represented the mountain inferno, which didn't fear any group battles. No matter how I looked at it, he shouldn't have been the first to be defeated. Arrogance came from hierarchy. In the beginning, humans were equal, but with the development of society, people were used to dividing people into different ranks and liked to label the division of labor. People who stood at the top were also used to looking down at the people below, and they treated the people below as playthings and non-humans. I had never viewed the original sins as evil. All original sins had a positive side as well as a negative side. The good pride was self-confidence, the self-recognition necessary to climb to the top. But if it was so excessive that one could only obtain satisfaction by looking down on their own kind, and obtain happiness by kicking their own kind, then that would obviously be going too far. Since all of you like to fight for a higher status, and like to climb to the top and look down on others, then I'll let you climb all you want. Mountains of knives, volcanoes, lava mountains, snowy mountains, and countless other cruel mountains existed in this dimension. But unlike normal snowy mountains, the lower the mountain, the colder it got. Underneath the volcanoes was basically molten steel. The other mountains were the same. The lower the mountain, the more deadly the environment. The higher the mountain, the more comfortable it was. The sinners who entered the mountain inferno naked could only desperately climb up barehanded if they wanted to have a more comfortable life. And as they climbed, there were many paths that only allowed one person to continue climbing. Fighting and even killing were unavoidable. And even if they climbed to a certain height, the demons would push them back down to the lowest level of the mountain inferno, forcing them to start all over again. Let's not talk about the philosophical and religious meaning of this mountain inferno. Just the dimensional laws of the mountain inferno made it the most suitable battlefield for enemies. Omar was the king of the mountain inferno. He always stood at the peak of the mountains. He could give his subordinates the right to fly freely in the mountains. Meanwhile, ordinary undead and invaders could only climb up step by step. They couldn't even use any supernatural abilities related to movement. They could only become passive targets. Shameless? Dimensional laws were shameless to begin with. Not to mention, this wasn't any ordinary dimension. Anyone else who entered Bastion's Rage Inferno would become a bloodthirsty lunatic. I had thought that with such a battle, with Omar's superpower, it would be impossible for him to lose. It would be easy for him to drag the match into overtime. Unfortunately for them, they encountered a main god-level demon lord of putrefaction, Ladvioka, who was going all out. Yes, going all out was the key. It was extremely rare for a main god to go all out. Demon bosses were difficult to deal with. This was a predictable fact, and their difficulty wasn't only reflected in their own strength. The long passage of time had given them completely different paths of growth, as well as completely different styles of doing things. However, every main god could be called a wily old fox. Sophocles the Deceiver easily agreed to negotiate with Sophocles because he discovered that it was truly possible that he would fail miserably here. The Hades was an independent plane that cut off all of Sophocles' paths of retreat. Even though the probability of him dying was less than 1/3, and even though he still had a bunch of trump cards up his sleeves, the always cautious Sophocles the Deceiver still chose the path of absolute safety and greatest benefits. Was there no other path for him? Was that all he had? The answer was obviously no. Countless years had given Sophocles plenty of foundational knowledge. Nobody knew how many trump cards he had. However, for a battle between main gods, the trump cards that could affect the battle would all be precious treasures that Sophocles had painstakingly gathered from all over the mortal planes. Sophocles wouldn't take them out if the benefits weren't worth it. Not to mention, there were other main gods here as well. It was highly likely that they would reveal their most important secrets. Some people said that the gods were just like countries. There were only benefits and no emotions between the gods. They would often probe and provoke each other, but it would be incredibly rare for them to start an all-out war. I felt that this was rather extreme, but it wasn't an exaggeration. The gods rarely fought each other. However, when they did, it would basically be a battle to the death. After all, only by stealing the other's mortal plane, divine power, believers, and divine concepts would the gods be able to make up for their losses in battle. This was also the reason why many gods' battles were only fought on doctrines and words. It was even rarer for main gods to fight against each other. At any rate, the Chaos Abyss and the Source of Order are unable to watch over them. We don't have any deep grudges against each other. As long as we show them enough power, they'll feel like they're at a disadvantage. Of course, they won't use their full strength. I had long since seen through all of this, which was why I chose to forcefully divide the gods. Being surrounded by yourself and losing contact with your reinforcements is no different from being directly sealed away. Even main god existences will instinctively choose to protect themselves when they discover that the investment is far greater than the return. In fact, they might even meet with danger. Since self-preservation is the priority, they'll naturally save some strength for a battle of attrition. What we need the most right now is time. The development of the situation proved that my analysis was correct. Sophocles chose to remain neutral. The god of wisdom made sufficient concessions, and the other main gods were all probing us at the start. If I showed weakness, they would naturally all rush over and devour us. But if I could make them feel like we were hedgehogs covered in poisonous spikes that would likely be at a disadvantage if they try to bite us, I would naturally be able to maintain a balance of power and drag the battle into a battle of attrition that I desire the most. Harlois' opponent was the god of wisdom. Even if the two of them became enemies, Harlois, who was also an archmage, would be able to escape unscathed. The turbid nightmare Karl's ability to evolve and heal himself was disgusting. Now he was facing Ah Dang, whose individual combat strength was incredibly high and who could evolve through eating. The battle situation seemed to prove that my choice was correct. However, there was one existence that exceeded my expectations from the very start. The Lord of Putrefaction, Ladvioka. The Lord of Putrefaction was also an army type. Naturally, I also sent out the Pride, Omar, who was an army type. In order to make Omar sufficiently strong, I even sent out my Night Knights to fight for him. Since I also had the power of the mountain range's dimensional laws, this should have been a guaranteed success. Damned Ladvioka! He's gone insane. Ladvioka was greatly tempted by the benefits of the mortal plane. Unlike the other main gods who were usually cautious, Ladvioka unhesitatingly used his full power and treasures that he had been saving up for countless years. My clone had already informed me that Ladvioka unhesitatingly used the method of forceful dimensional descent in response to the dimensional laws of the mountain range and the power of the dimensional plane. Difficult to understand? That was to forcefully summon a dimension that was already under Ladvioka's control and forcefully cause the dimensions to overlap and collide, just like how a bastard would throw Mars at Earth. In some worlds, Ladvioka was treated as a creator god. However, he obviously wasn't a good father. At the very least, he didn't have any feelings for his children. Ladvioka used the shattered pieces of a continent with living beings as if they were consumables. He forcefully broke through the dimensional walls of the Hades. No matter what the result was, it was obvious that the lives on the shattered continents would meet their end after the two dimensions collided. It would be difficult to calculate how many would survive. On one side were the shattered pieces of the mortal plane, while on the other side was the inferno of the Hades. The collision caused the dimensional laws of the mortal plane to distort, causing dimensional cracks to appear. Even the powerful Death Knight Knights wouldn't be able to survive in such an environment. This also allowed a large number of dimensional survivors to forcefully enter the mountain inferno and continue to fight for its sake. The densely packed worker ants began to spread the belief in natural laws of the mountain inferno. Ladvioka had destroyed at least 20 independent dimensions in order to distort the natural laws of the mountain inferno, causing tens of millions of years of accumulation to go to waste. That meant that in order to obtain the dimensional laws and world of this mortal plane, Ladvioka unhesitatingly destroyed more than 20 of his own worlds and more than half of the living beings in them. Why had Ladvioka, who was a main god-level demon with multiple dimensions, suddenly sacrificed nearly half of his entire wealth? At this moment, Ladvioka no longer had any path of retreat. He could only fight to the bitter end. Our first mortal enemy in this battle had appeared. Many messages came from my clones. The mountain range had been conquered, and the 4 central halls of the Hades were under threat. The next moment, I knew that I had to make a decision. I'm gonna go beat up that damned fatty first. Come with me if you dare. I brought Marcelet with me and disappeared. I casually opened a teleportation portal to the mountain range, but I didn't close it. The moment that I disappeared, my aura could be sensed from the other side of the teleportation portal. And so, Cavendish unhesitatingly stepped into the teleportation portal. This was an incredibly simple method of provoking me. Cavendish wouldn't fear a challenge, nor would he avoid a challenge from me. But this didn't mean that I wouldn't play tricks on him. I chose to teleport to the inside of a volcano in the mountain range. I would first have him bathe in the lava to calm himself down. Rala, you're playing tricks on me again. Cough. I ignored Rala's angry roars from deep underground. Right now, the mountain range before me was a scene of Armageddon. Countless fragments of continents and worlds were forcefully crashing into the mountain range like meteors. This was no longer a natural disaster on the level of a meteor shower. If I looked up, it was like countless moons were crashing down. Numerous holes were torn in the sky. Snow mountains were forcefully melted by the lava of hell. Volcanoes that spewed flames were forcefully flattened by the fragments of continents. Even more deadly was the fact that the dimensional laws of the mountain range made it difficult for the mountain range to digest. Large amounts of dimensional cracks weren't sealed, causing the dead to temporarily lose their undying nature. Amidst the chaos, a sufficient amount of dimensional fragments and dimensional laws had already caused the demons to construct chaos abyss fortresses. Large amounts of mystical creatures were traveling back and forth. At the center of the battlefield, Ladvioka was currently trampling and tearing apart the remains of the Death Knight, preventing and delaying any possibility of their revival. I unhesitatingly roared in anger as I stood on the Envy battleship and witnessed this scene. Marcelet, Big Dipper Fleet, transform and depart. Chapter 464. Envy was Marcelet, the Borealis. Although he appeared quite often among the 7 original sins, his actual combat strength wasn't all that outstanding. Perhaps some people would say that he was too young, but the strength of an undead would often depend on their soul core. Actually, Marsalit had used a semi-god's soul core. He was an incredibly stubborn avenger, so his soul's starting point was quite high. All this time, what had limited his combat strength was actually the original sin that he represented: envy. The original sins were shards of my soul. My understanding of the original sins determined his abilities. Out of all the original sins, envy was one of the most unique. Envy was the original sin with the least negative value. In fact, most of the time, it existed as a positive value. From a certain standpoint, its positive value was far greater than its negative value. There were probably only a few people who held grudges against those who were better than them in terms of talent, status, reputation, knowledge, wealth, and circumstances. However, there were probably quite a few people who would think, "Why can't it be me?" or "I'm not any worse than him, and I'll definitely be able to do better next time," when they saw their classmates and friends who were better than them. From a certain standpoint, envy and pride were two similar yet opposite concepts. Pride was the condescension and disdain of those in a higher position towards those in a lower position. Meanwhile, envy was the desire of those in a lower position to become those in a higher position. As long as there were differences between individuals and classes in this world, envy would probably be unavoidable. At the very least, everyone would have the unwillingness of being surpassed by their own kind. Sometimes, the same ingredient would be a tonic, and sometimes it would truly be a poison. Idiots would only ignore the other's natural talents and efforts to achieve their goals. They would transform envy into flames that slandered and attacked the other. Smart people would maintain their strong unwillingness and transform the flames in their chests into whips that whipped themselves. At the same time, they would also be able to analyze the other's strengths and advantages. They would think of ways to imitate, learn, and make up for their own weaknesses. This was my personal analysis of envy. It might not necessarily be correct. No, I should say that everyone had their own understanding of the original sins. There was no such thing as a correct answer to begin with. And the envy airship fleet's ability was a fragment of my own soul. This was the perfect interpretation of my own definition of envy. The lower people were at the bottom of the pyramid, the more they would desire to improve. In other words, they would have the so-called intense desire to improve. That was why envy's original airship didn't have any additional combat strength. It was simply a blank platform that wouldn't conflict with any power system. At the very beginning, it was nothing more than a zero. What would evolve into would depend on how many abilities it could imitate and steal in battle. His true uniqueness was that he had potential that wouldn't clash with any spare parts or abilities. It was a type of zero that could grow limitlessly, a type of hunger that would forever desire to grow and evolve. Perhaps some people would think that envy's ability was the same as Dang's ability, but it was actually completely different. Dang was a creature's evolution through predation. It was an instinctive strengthening of itself. Dang's scariest ability was actually the limitless life force that he obtained through devouring. As for envy's airship fleet, it was a type of active and selective imitation of Dang. Judging from my theoretical calculations, as long as it was given enough time in combat, it would sooner or later surpass all the other original sins in terms of combat strength. Even if it would take tens of thousands of years, Envy Marsalit would definitely become the strongest individual after fighting on countless battlefields. However, I couldn't wait that long, and so the Big Dipper airship fleet came into being. That's right, the Big Dipper airship fleet was composed of 7 mega-sized airships. Actually, they were all parts that I had created for Marsalit. Yep, the entire airship fleet was a part, and the Borealis was only one of the core parts. Just thinking about what kind of monster it would be when all of them were combined together made me quite happy. But imagination was always good, and reality was always harsh. Shipbuilding was quite expensive, and the result of large-scale construction was that the resources would be used up before the rare airship of my dreams could even be built, and the ports would be sealed until the following year. Even with Shilua's national power, I had only been able to build 2 Dragonbone airships, the Mizar and the Greed. I still needed 4 more airships to complete the basic skeleton of the blueprint. It could be said that I hadn't even completed half of the construction, which meant that I couldn't use them in actual combat. But fortunately, I dug up a treasure here. Awaken, guardian god of the eternal thunder people, tiger god rune seal. Following my will and summoning, the gigantic skeleton awoke from its slumber. A terrifying roar came from behind the gate of the plunderer's purgatory. The great desolate beast tore through the obstruction of space and arrived at the mountain purgatory. At this moment, the entire mountain inferno was trembling with the arrival of the god of holy light. Just how terrifying of an existence was this? Just its skull alone was larger than even the largest supreme immemorial dragon. The first to pass through the mountain inferno were 2 dragonbone airships that no longer had any passengers on them, the Greed and the Mizar. Against the god of holy light, Marsalit was greatly countered. He didn't even get to use the trump card that I had prepared for him before he was directly defeated. Big Dipper, transform. Let's go. Fervent shouts were still echoing in the air. The mega giants that had been crippled and the mega-sized airships that were part of the Big Dipper had already arrived. Unfortunately, there was no exciting music to accompany them. All right, at this point, it was likely that some people had already guessed what I intended to do. Borealis, you form the body. Mizar, you form the left arm. Greed, you form the right leg. Tiger God Rune Seal, you form the rest. I'll form the head. Forward, War God Vajra, War God of the Big Dipper. While all my opponents were confused, I ignored my system and the silly cat comments of, you just can't grow up. You're still playing with dolls at your age, and what an old joke. You're exposing your age. A pitch-black bone giant appeared in the Hades amidst the sounds of bones crashing and twisting. It was impossible to calculate how tall he was. That was because the tallest snow mountain only reaches waist. The arrogant and insane lord of putrefaction didn't even reach his knees. His entire body was covered in pitch-black bones. At the core, protected by the ribs, the Borealis was glowing as if it was a beating heart. Meanwhile, his crippled left hand and right foot became his strongest weapons. The roaring Mizar opened its cannons, and dragon breath revolved around the cannons. Meanwhile, the arachnid on his right foot gave him super powerful propulsion to cross space. Perhaps this was only a crippled bone giant, but just looking at this giant beast that defied all common sense caused all the dimensional invaders to feel powerless from the bottom of their hearts. What's this? What kind of joke is this? He has such a large body and such terrifying power. Why hasn't he self-destructed? Among them, the Lord of Putrefaction had the strangest reaction. This is impossible. This completely defies the most basic biology of life. Not a single dimension can give birth to such a monster. This has surpassed the main god level. That's right, just by looking at its energy reaction and instantaneous power output, this combined monster had indeed surpassed the limits of a main god. The dimensions, the Bandit Inferno and the Mountain Inferno, have successfully combined. I finally finished what I was doing and heaved a sigh of relief. Since the Lord of Putrefaction was able to use dimensional descent to destroy the dimensional laws of this dimension, as I was the ruler of the Hades, I could naturally use dimensional descent to make up for the gap here. The Bandit Inferno that was already empty was pulled over here. The dimensional laws of the undead were repairing each other. Although the combination of the two infernos would have a lot of side effects, it would be of great use on the battlefield right now. The Hades aura of death spread out as the crippled Death Knight stood up once again. Meanwhile, the countless dead people in the two infernos voluntarily entered the giant's body and became its spare parts, giving the giant enough energy to move and fight. Slaughter, plunder, evolve. Only scattered bodies would be meaningless against a main god-level existence. Only by combining their wills and souls together would they be able to achieve a qualitative breakthrough. The Bone Giant was a pure combat machine. Slaughter and plunder had become its pure instincts. These simple words represented the Bone Giant's overwhelming fighting spirit. Just his first step caused countless earthquakes. Even a main god demon, main god, couldn't help but wonder if he had made the worst possible decision when he saw how the bone giant's magic didn't even react to the bone giant's terrifying presence at all. The gathering of countless souls gave the bone giant an explosive power that surpassed even a main god. The tiger god's corpse gave the bone giant a skeleton and body that contained his power. The three ultimate battleships were his most important organs and arms. This monster that was pieced together should have only been born 10,000 years later. However, the dimensional laws of the Hades made the impossible a reality. No, this is impossible. This has surpassed the limits of the mortal plane. He'll soon collapse. My children, destroy him. Stall him for me. The hysterical lord of putrefaction sent his children to their deaths. The bone giant casually waved his hand, and his extreme black dragon flames created an inferno that destroyed everything. Wherever the bone giant stepped on would be a hellish fissure that devoured all the warriors. In front of this monster that even the Titan King feared, even the Lord of Putrefaction seemed like nothing more than a slightly larger animal. The Lord of Putrefaction's twisted children were dying in large numbers. In front of the future warrior who had transcended the flow of time, the resistance of ants was meaningless. Even a dragon wouldn't be as large as the Lord of Putrefaction's thumb. A one-sided slaughter continued on the battlefield. Meanwhile, I was calculating the time until the bone giant collapsed. That's right, collapse. This monstrous giant monster was a half-finished product to begin with. It was a randomly modified blueprint, hastily created spare parts, randomly filled with energy, and forcefully glued together by the power of natural laws. This was an impossible creation that completely violated the limits of this world's elemental tide. I was already quite astonished that it could move. It was unknown how long it could fight for. At the very least, we need to kill off a main god before it collapses. Envy, tear that stupid green demon to shreds. Take revenge for your older brother. Chapter 465. The tear in the sky hadn't closed yet, but there were countless abyssal fissures on the pitch-black ground. The abnormal sensation of these fissures made me feel uncomfortable. If anyone fell into one of these fissures, it was likely that nobody would know where they would appear. Kill Ladvioka. I want him to be the first Chaos main god to perish in this holy war. I gave the order to kill as I stood at the top of the mountain. Just the gigantic bone giant's walking was enough to make any attempts to stop him a joke. Countless ants charged at Ladvioka to their deaths, while the Lord of Putrefaction himself retreated. As a main god, Ladvioka was already used to staying far away from life and death battles. The last time he had felt such fear of dying at any moment was over 5,000 years ago in the last Holy War. And it was precisely because he had suffered in the previous Holy War that he refused to be summoned by the will of the Chaos Abyss in the previous Holy War. He only participated in the final Holy War to gain experience and steal spoils of war. The end result was that the will of the Chaos Abyss loathed him and demoted him to a demon main god who was only a marquis. He became a laughingstock for a while. Of course, at this point, not many people dared to mock him. He was no longer interested in becoming a demon main god. The Chaos Abyss had already given him everything he could. If he wanted to improve, he could only rely on his own plundering and training. And since the Chaos Abyss didn't like him, perhaps it was precisely because of this that he desperately desired this mortal plane. Perhaps it was also because the cruel holy war had frightened him so much that he changed his demon main god lord's direct and reckless approach and began to nurture armies and battle formations. But now, those dangerous magical creatures that he had painstakingly nurtured were unable to protect him. The destructive bone giant approached closer and closer. It was as if the end of destruction had arrived. Stop it. Stop at all costs. The angry demon commanded its cannon fodder to stop the bone giant's charge. Although its subordinates obeyed its order, it wasn't very effective. The powerful pale white insect queen was capable of creating a time of her own. Given enough time, she was even capable of destroying an entire mortal plane by herself. Even a true god would be helpless against her. But before she could even activate the bee formation that she was so proud of, she and her soldiers were burned to ashes by the black flames. Countless magical insects and demon nests were also burned to ashes together with them. The demon elephant army, which was feared by all the Chaos Abyss demons due to its powerful charge and gigantic size, wasn't even as tall as the bone giant's heel. Charging in groups actually made things easier for the bone giant as it stomped them to death like ants. As for the distorted half-angels who spread plague and death, their most powerful skills were useless against this undead creature. Even before they could do any damage, the bone giant's powerful aura of death transformed them into true dried corpses. Just breathing could create hurricanes. Just looking could spread death. Just walking could create canyons. In front of demons from the Chaos Abyss and other dimensions, Envy's skeletal giant form showed them what a true nightmare was and what a true dimensional destroyer was. Waves of magical beasts were killed, trampled to death, and burned to death. The gigantic bone giant crushed everything in its way. It was getting closer and closer to Ladvioka's temporary abyssal fortress. For this demon lord who was attempting to regain the recognition of the will of the Chaos Abyss, the nightmare of war was becoming more and more real. How could such a ridiculous thing possibly exist? The bone giant was created purely out of the natural laws of death. Countless souls were used as the bone giant's energy. And since the natural laws of this world stipulated that the dead couldn't die again, no matter if it was the bone giant or the undead that provided energy for the bone giant, they all had the ability to regenerate limitlessly. This meant that Vajra had an infinite amount of energy. Since he had limitless energy, the grand blueprint gave the bone giant an inconceivable amount of energy. With the two combined, and with the restrictions of the natural laws of the Hades, he created an undead perpetual motion machine, creating this monster whose energy level surpassed that of main gods. The gods were extraordinary because they relied on the dimensional laws of the mortal plane. In the world where they became gods, they were the ones with a certain amount of authority. If any ordinary powerful individual wanted to defeat them, they would first have to think of a way to seal or weaken the dimensional laws that the gods controlled, reducing the gods to mere mortals. Since I already predicted that I would be attacked by a main god, how could I not make preparations? The Hades were my divine kingdom. I had a sufficiently powerful dimensional law. But in my opinion, directly using the dimensional laws to cause damage was nothing more than a stupid method. That was because the dimensional laws had their limits. Using the dimensional laws to strengthen my strongest aspect, my creations would make their strongest aspect even stronger. That was the best way to use the power of the dimensional laws. And when I played with the dimensional laws to the extreme, I created an existence that surpassed the limits. Since the Lord of Putrefaction was going all out against me. All right, let's see whose ace card is more vicious. Lavioka, I can understand your fear. After all, the most important thing for an army is a fierce general that can surpass the numerical advantage. But this is only the beginning. Awaken, dead. Fight for your new master. Black mist spread throughout the entire world. The Hades weren't the most important part of life. They were only the beginning of everything. The pale white insect queen reappeared in the center of the battlefield with her biohazard calamity. But this time, her eyes that had been sewn shut were now open. Her elegant white eyes were actually compound eyes composed of countless single eyes. However, her eyes were filled with hatred as she stared in the direction she had just been desperately defending. Fatal bee swarms and death mushroom bombs appeared once again. But this time, their target was the demon army that was still alive. The distorted angels, war elephants, and other magical beasts were the same. The moment they crawled back up from the ground, they immediately charged at their former master. Haha, a human wave tactic? You want to compete against me in an army battle? You want to compete against me, a super undead mage, in my Hades? Lavioka, you must be crazy. As long as I was able to cause a large number of casualties, the undead calamity would be able to drag any army into an apocalypse. But what surprised me was that I only sped up the revival of the dead without distorting their wills. More than 70% of the newborns actually attacked Ladvioka with all their might. New Master, if your home is destroyed by Ladvioka, your friends and family are sent to be experimented on. Your people are all destroyed because they are unqualified, and you yourself become a tool of war. You'll hate such a creator as well. Even without the insect queen's telepathic message, I could understand the reason. It was obvious that Ladvioka wasn't a suitable employer. No matter what kind of contracts or methods of control he had, they would naturally become ineffective after he died once. As for the minority that still remained loyal to him, I directly tossed them into the River of Souls, having them leave the core of this battle. A strange scene appeared on the battlefield. The undead knights were charging, while the demons that had just been defeated immediately got up and changed sides. Without a doubt, this was the turning point of the battle. At this moment, the demon lord who had been abnormally silent finally raised his head. The hatred in his eyes transformed into actual poisonous flames. He suddenly tossed out a gigantic war hammer that was covered in hellfire. An orange firestorm suddenly rose up and engulfed the entire world. Above the war hammer, the flames transformed into an enraged inferno demon that was roaring in the void. The inferno demon seemed to be angrily arguing with the inferno demon. The next instant, an orange ring of light began to spread out. The seemingly harmless ripples passed through all the inferno demons. The weaker ones were instantly ignited and watched as they were burned to ash, while the stronger ones suddenly self-destructed. Such a ripple? Pure fire magic? A forbidden spell? That's right. Along with the mushroom clouds flying into the sky were countless cries of agony and flowers of fire. No matter if it was in terms of area of effect or individual damage, this was a forbidden spell that far surpassed what mortals could achieve. In less than 2 minutes, the demon lord had actually cast a forbidden spell. I never expected that the rumor that Ladvioka was once an inferno demon was actually true. His attainments in fire magic have probably far surpassed any human mages. But although the flames are beautiful, they're meaningless. That's right, meaningless. In the eyes of top-level combat strength, large-scale forbidden spells wouldn't be effective against individual targets. The greatest use of forbidden spells would be to clear out small fries. However, our trump card right now was the skeleton Vajra, which had been assembled together. As long as it got close to us, it would be impossible for us to survive. The forbidden spell's flames covered the skeleton Vajra's entire body. However, the flames were instantly extinguished. I didn't even have the thought of dodging. Perhaps the flames of death could easily kill ordinary giants, but there was an absolute difference in power level. It would be difficult for them to even break through Envy's defenses. It would be impossible for them to even kill my incarnation. As expected, snowflakes began to fall from the sky. The skeleton Vajra warriors that had just been ignited regained their physical bodies. As long as the rules of the Hades weren't broken, how could the dead possibly die again? The forbidden spell would only delay the skeleton Vajra warriors' second charge. Considering how many living demons had died to the forbidden spell, the next charge would only be fiercer. However, something unexpected happened. The gigantic skeleton Vajra suddenly paused as his body tilted to the side, almost collapsing to the ground. What's going on? Undead regeneration? Within the skeleton Vajra skeleton were countless undead from the mountain range and Hella marauders. They were the skeleton Vajra's portable batteries, and many of their souls were currently being reborn. The gigantic skeleton Vajra's body wouldn't receive much damage. However, the dangerous flames successfully killed and injured the ordinary undead within the skeleton. Although the undead would soon revive, there would naturally be a gap in the skeleton Vajra skeleton, just like a machine that suddenly ran out of power. The skeleton Vajra naturally stopped. The vanguard general suddenly stopped, causing the undead army to inevitably fall into chaos. The next instant, Ladvioka actually unfurled a pair of flame wings on his back. These wings were the signature organs of an inferno demon, and he flew up with his gigantic and fat body. Perhaps everyone had underestimated this low-key demon lord. Although he seemed to have retreated from the front lines of the battlefield, he had never given up on improving his inferno demon instincts. No matter if it was physical combat or fire magic, he was still the strongest inferno demon. Ladvioka grasped a huge flaming sword that suddenly appeared in midair, and then he viciously threw it at the Borealis's heart. As long as the heart was destroyed, even if the skeleton Vajra could be reborn, the skeleton Vajra would be dismembered, and it would be impossible for the skeleton Vajra to be reconnected again in this battle. Should I say that as expected of a demon main god? He actually found the skeleton Vajra's weakness so quickly, but in just an instant, the battle-hardened demon lord grasped the key point of the war. Even I felt that I had underestimated Ladvioka. If I had used normal combat strength to force him into a melee fight, I would likely have been at a disadvantage. But you're underestimating me too much. Invert Mountain Inferno. I reached out with my hand, and the image of a mountain range appeared in my hand. The image of the mountain range covered half the sky, with a compass and runes marking the direction. The moment I reached out, the compass began to tilt again. The N and S, which represented the direction, switched places. The entire mountain inferno was instantly flipped upside down. The original sky became the earth, and the original earth became the sky. Gravity changed directions. Ladvioka, who was flying in the sky, threw himself into the sky. Countless living and dead were all thrown into the original sky. Compared to the other infernos, the mountain inferno's sky wasn't that high. If one flew up, they would be able to see the ceiling at the end of the sky, or, more accurately speaking, the second mountain inferno was made up of countless mountain ranges. There were snow mountains, sword mountains, volcanoes, and so on. If they were stacked on top of each other, they would even completely overlap, just like a reflection of the previous dimension. This wasn't something I had done out of the blue, nor was it possible for me to do such a large-scale transfer. This was just one of the mountain inferno's incredibly vile characteristics. Arrogance comes from one's level. Since you like to climb mountains, then go ahead and climb as much as you want. You won't forget to create your favorite fights and obstacles along the way. And when you truly reach the peak, that's when you start climbing again. Did you really think that I would allow you to rest and enjoy life? How could there possibly be an end to the Mountain Inferno's punishments before atoning for their sins? The Mountain Inferno's punishment for climbing had no end. If someone truly reached the peak, they would be rewarded with a short period of happiness before the Mountain Inferno's world reversal would force them to start all over again. Of course, the short period of time they would be rewarded would become their motivation to climb again. I could already predict the praise I would receive after this design was made public. This was one of the Inferno designs I was most satisfied with. But right now, when I suddenly activated this mechanism, it became the demon army's greatest nightmare. Ladvioka and the demon army all fell into the new Mountain Inferno. They were burned, frozen, stabbed to death, and all sorts of other punishments were inflicted upon them. Of course, the most common punishment was a loud smack as they were directly smashed into meat patties. The fortress that the demon army had just dug out became completely meaningless. The part that had been corroded by the dimensional descent was completely replaced by the most complete part. The density of Hades' mist instantly increased by several times. Of course, the prerequisite was that the demon army didn't fall to their deaths. Only then would they be able to complain about the suddenly worsening battlefield conditions. Ladvioka's sudden change in direction caused the terrifyingly heavy Ladvioka to instantly transform into a meteor. By the time he dizzily crawled out of a collapsed volcano, he discovered that his entire army had been destroyed. Apart from the lucky ones who had wings, the great majority of demons and otherworld creatures had either transformed into the undead or were about to become the undead that would devour their masters. When the bone giant stood up again, the only enemy that could be considered a threat was the dark green demon. "Aw, Roland, you tricked me." As for the unfortunate main god who had just crawled out of a volcano and jumped too high in excitement, only to be directly smashed into another volcano, we could pretend that we didn't see him. Chapter 466. The more primitive a battle was, the more violent and simple it would be. Battles for the sake of survival and revenge would often be bloody and cruel. The battles between savages and wild beasts in the forest would often be simple and direct. The primitive rules of revenge would result in cruel tribal warfare, with no innocent survivors. But in a certain dimension's modern warfare actually had rules and unwritten rules, such as normal warfare, no large-scale destructive weapons, restricted flight zones, international conventions, so that civilians won't be accidentally injured. Don't joke around. Isn't war supposed to be a battle to the death? Why would anyone worry about killing too slowly? If they really cared about civilians, they would have given up on the benefits that war can bring. It would have been better not to fight at all. They're just worried about going overboard and bringing trouble upon themselves. Adding all sorts of restrictions and rules to modern warfare wasn't because humans had finally become civilized and friendly. It was simply because both sides had apocalyptic weapons capable of destroying each other. Destruction and Armageddon became far too easy. In order to prevent the war from constantly escalating, the final victor would be left with nothing but rubble and a living hell. In the various dimensions of He, battles between powerful gods were the same. Forbidden spell-level attacks would be nothing to them. Battles between main gods would be even more cautious. They would carefully test each other, accumulate advantages, and carefully erase the other's advantages. Only at the very last moment would one use their trump card, because that would mean that the other side would also go all out. The final result would be impossible to predict, but casually slaughtering the other side's believers and destroying the environment would be the most likely result of both sides losing. If Latveoka hadn't gone insane, I wouldn't have needed to use Envy's incomplete final form. At first, I didn't intend to force a main god to their limits, because that would be incredibly dangerous. However, there were no ifs on the battlefield. Since the situation had already reached this point, no matter what the final result was, both sides could only accept it. The gigantic bone giant didn't hide his killing intent at all. Latveoka had been forced into a corner. Everything seemed to be about to be revealed, but I didn't dare to be careless. Even though Carwins had just fallen into the volcano, that didn't mean much to Carwins. Carwins instantly reappeared and directly started cooking his fish soup again. Let's not talk about how this fish soup came to be. Carwins was clearly not willing to help either side, but I doubted that he would care about any brotherly ties. Perhaps he was hoping to see Latveoka directly die. Latveoka glared angrily at Cavendish, but didn't say anything. In demons' dictionaries, friends who help each other was the equivalent of naive and gullible idiots. It would be unbelievably friendly of them to not kick you into the abyss when you were in trouble. It would seem that ignoring Cavendish was the best option right now, but I still unhesitatingly, I order my pale white queen to attack. Latveoka, of miracles! As I expected, the Cavendish that was pierced through was only a mirage. Latveoka's true body had vanished without a trace. I had previously been wondering why he had taken so long to crawl out of the underground rock. It would seem that he had already begun to move on his own. Yep, I definitely wasn't wondering why this single-celled Latveoka would suddenly stop, nor was it some mysterious connection between brothers. Could it be that the dimensional door just now allowed him to learn the secret of moving between the infernos? Damn it, no matter where he is, find him. I didn't believe that any ordinary main god would be able to learn the secrets of the Hades so easily. However, I could sense that Cavendish wasn't currently in the Mountain Infernos. When I considered the fact that Cavendish and the existences that could hide in his body, I felt an ominous feeling that made it impossible for me to ignore this possibility. A freely moving main god would obviously be a threat. I sent out my incarnations to search for Latveoka while also focusing on Latveoka. After all, Envy could disintegrate at any moment. If I could kill off a main god first to establish my dominance, it would likely greatly increase our chances of victory. He probably doesn't have any subordinates left. Since Latveoka was born as an inferno demon, let me recall what other inferno demons are skilled at. Beheading Sword, Inferno Demon Whip, Meteor Shower, powerful melee attacks, self-immolation. Damn it, isn't this just self-destruction? Lavioka actually has something as insane as self-destruction? A main god's self-destruction? If he really self-destructs, will this Inferno? No. Will the entire Hades be able to survive? My incarnation suddenly sent me a message that forced me to give up on trying to guess at Lavioka's trump card. Due to an unexpected matter, I didn't have much time left. Omar, how much longer do you intend to pretend to be asleep for? It's morning. Wake up and have fun. While Roland was using his trump card in an attempt to kill the Lord of Putrefaction, the situation in the other Infernos seemed to be silently changing. Against the icy chaos war god Donati's, the angry demon hound kept growing larger and larger as he died. However, even though Donati's energy level was now 100 times greater than before, the result of the battle still hadn't changed at all. At most, Donati's would be instantly killed to be able to last a few rounds. At this moment, Donati's wasn't having an easy time either. His opponent's strength was only one factor. More importantly, reinforcements suddenly joined the battle. Now that it was 2 against 1, the entire battle situation was reversed. Donati's trident had a mystical power that transformed into meteors that constantly attacked Donati's vitals. Donati's demon claws were capable of easily tearing through mountains, yet they were capable of directly clashing against the Chaos War god's heavy sword. Donati's also had a powerful body and the power of the Hades. Although Donati's was slightly inferior to the Chaos War god in pure melee combat, he was actually superior in pure physical strength. Donati's was at a major disadvantage. The fourth of the 4 halls of Hades was the Hall of Hell, Hall of Law Enforcement. This was the headquarters of the nobles that served as the Hell's prison guards. The head of the Hall of Law Enforcement was the currently sleeping little TIAs. Ghost General Martian was the first devil of the Hades. Although he hadn't reached the level of a main god yet, he had been a warrior from the same generation as Ale. After so many years of accumulation, he had surpassed the so-called powerful gods. And after obtaining the noble authority to protect the Hades and punish villains, Martian's power level had improved even further. Although Martian wasn't a main god, he was still an immemorial devil. As the guardian species of the Hades, demons were unable to leave this world. Not only that, but they also had the same undying nature as the dead. This was something that even Venatas feared, an undying opponent who was about as strong as he was. Unlike the inexperienced Bastion, devils and demons were mortal enemies. This wasn't Martian's first time fighting against Venatas. Even though there was a certain difference in power level, Martian's undying nature was more than enough to make up for this difference. If Martian exchanged blows with Venatas, the one who would die in the end would definitely be Venatas. Martian's leader, Camillus, was still in a deep sleep. He was also in order to complete his transformation into a devil. As long as he completed his transformation, not to mention all the other benefits, just the undying nature of the devils and the Hades would be a main god's undying nature. But if Camillus truly succeeded in his transformation, it was likely that the entire situation on the battlefield would be reversed. This wasn't some idiotic manga. Villains who obtained an undying body would mysteriously have their intelligence greatly reduced, and they would be unknowingly sealed away by the main character. When the original Devil Lord, the current leader of the devils in the Hades, awakened, an undying and sly main god would become the greatest calamity for the invaders. All we need to do is stall for time, protect the Inferno and the 4 pillars, and we'll be the victors. This was also the main reason why Roland had set the goal of stalling for time for so many battles. As time passed, the Hades would become even more complete, and the gods of the Hades would also become even more powerful. At that time, it would naturally be time for them to counterattack. If it wasn't for the fact that the Lord of Putrefaction had gone overboard, Roland wouldn't have needed to use his trump card. But it was precisely because main gods were so powerful that even though Roland had given him all the resources for the transformation process, the transformation process was still incredibly slow. Martian, who had originally been Barty's guard, came out to help when he saw that Barty still didn't show any signs of waking up. Even Venadas found it difficult to deal with two powerful individuals with undying bodies. It was likely that he would have to use his trump card if this situation continued. Meanwhile, the negotiation table between Harlois and the God of Wisdom was obviously different from the current battlefield. Not only was the atmosphere wonderful, the two of them had just finished shaking hands and signed a contract that was 500 pages long. They were actually using the ability to speed up time to negotiate the details of the contract, as well as to bargain with each other. Meanwhile, in Gluttony's Inferno, two gigantic beasts were currently tearing at each other. Both of their mouths were on each other's bodies. They were devouring each other, but they were also being devoured by each other. Magic and supernatural abilities had been forgotten. Pure desire to eat dominated everything. But this just happened to be in accordance with the basic natural laws of this plane. Endless life force caused both sides' physical bodies to be damaged and regenerate. Both sides tried to open their mouths wider than the other, and also try to have more mouths than the other. Countless pairs of eyes could only see each other. It would seem that neither of these two beasts had any intention of leaving the Inferno until they completely devoured each other. Meanwhile, in a certain corner of Inferno, the Queen of Temptation's Omygia sighed as she watched this battle that made people feel helpless as they devoured each other and tore at each other's throats. She decided to go to a slightly more civilized battlefield that had a slightly more aesthetic sense of war. Suddenly, a young and hurried voice spoke in her ear. She immediately recalled the young man who had now become the master of the Hades. However, his voice now contained a rare hint of panic and urgency. Omygia, go to the Pillar of Ice and stop that person. Chapter 467. The entire 7 hells of the Hades were now embroiled in the flames of war. The chaotic situation made it impossible for anyone to predict what would happen next. How did he know? Well, my clone informed me that Cavendish was actually in front of the Pillar of Ice. After a short moment of astonishment, I then felt that this was inconceivable. The 4 pillars were the pillars and core of the Hades, as well as their only weakness. The reason why our undead and undead armies were able to maintain a stalemate on the battlefield against the main gods was mainly due to the support of the Hades' natural laws. Their simple and violent undying forms gave us the confidence to attack again and again. However, being undefeatable obviously came with a price. The Hades' own support would also reveal the secrets of the Hades. But since I intentionally hid it, I didn't believe that anyone trapped in the 7 hells of hell would be able to come into contact with the foundation of this world, the 4 pillars. The 7 hells of hell were the secondary planes of the Hades. Although they were an important part of the Hades, it was possible to abandon them and reconstruct them when necessary. The 7 hell kings were incredibly powerful and incredibly difficult to deal with. They were doubtlessly the best fighters of the Hades. But on a strategic level, they were nothing more than targets to attract the main god's attention. The 4 halls were the operating systems of the Hades. They seemed to have many functions, and the Hades gods and demons were the guards. They were also incredibly eye-catching due to being connected to the 7 hells of hell. But if they were lost, they could be reconstructed. Not to mention, the 4 halls supported and protected each other. They were the strongest fortresses of the Hades. But the 4 pillars, the Hades are still being constructed. The current 4 pillars are the 4 elemental construction material outlets. They're the source of materials for constructing the Hades, as well as the core of control. If the Hades are completed, it's possible to replace one of the pillars if we lose one. But if we lose one now, the elemental balance will become unbalanced, and it's highly likely that the entire Hades will be destroyed. Even without considering the additional chain reactions, if we lost the Pillar of Ice, our undead would lose their physical bodies, greatly reducing their combat strength. If we lost the Pillar of Death, we wouldn't even have our undying nature. If we lost the Pillar of Law, which represented space, the entire Hades would likely begin collapsing. Since this was a weakness, we naturally had to make up for it. Out of the 4 pillars, the Pillar of Light and Salvation was at the very top of the Hades. There were other arrangements for the Pillar of Light and Salvation. The Pillar of Light and Salvation seemed to be defenseless, but it was actually quite safe. I wasn't worried about it. The Pillar of Death is the source of the death aura of the Hades. It is also the foundation of the Hades. Before the other pillars of the Hades are destroyed, even I don't know where the Pillar of Death is. The Pillar of Law resided in the four halls. If it fell, the four halls and 7 prisons would have already collapsed. There would be no meaning in persisting. Only the Pillar of Frost. It's in the depths of the 4th prison, Heartless Purgatory, which I'm guarding. That's also the core of the 7 hells. All the dead souls in the 7 hells will be given new lives and bodies by the Pillar of Frost. Each of the 4 pillars has its own function. The Pillar of Holy Light is located at the top of the Hades. It's the boundary between life and death, guiding the living and the dead. The Pillar of Law illuminates the 4 halls of justice, making them impartial in enforcing the law. The Pillar of Ice grants life and bodies to the undead of the 7 hells. The Pillar of Death creates the foundation of the Hades. They're like the pillars of a house. It's impossible to move them anywhere else. Now it can be seen that under my intentional arrangements, the other 3 pillars are all quite safe. However, the Pillar of Ice is destined to be exposed on the front lines of the battlefield. I placed the Heartless Purgatory, which represents sloth, in the 4th prison so that I can personally guard it. This will reduce the chances of its weakness being exposed. I also moved the battlefield of my own volition in hopes of reducing the chances of Cavendish discovering its weakness. However, the Tower of Ice was mysteriously exposed, which naturally shocked me. A traitor? That's unlikely. Only a few people know about this. In that case, is Cavendish capable of instantly analyzing the dimensional laws of the entire Hades? That's even more impossible. Where did he get his dimensional knowledge from? It even involves my knowledge from another world. How could he possibly know about it? Those who like to scheme and scheme all had a bad habit of overthinking things when their plans went awry. And on the battlefield, overthinking would not only lead to doubts about one's comrades, but also lead to conflicts. Overthinking would also weaken one's combat strength. Forget it. There's no time for me to worry about such things. Ilmigia, go to the Pillar of Ice. Stop that person. Apart from the Hades gods and demon lords who are currently in hibernation and transforming, as well as the high-level combat strength that had yet to act, it seemed that the only person free right now was the queen of all lustful demons, Ilmigia, the queen of temptations. As the ruler of the Hades, I was the only one who had the right to freely teleport within the Hades. With a snap of my fingers, a dimensional door appeared in front of Ilmigia. As long as she entered the dimensional door, she would definitely be able to catch up to Cavendish. However, I didn't have any hopes that she would actually be able to stop Cavendish. Perhaps the Hades had already finished transforming most of her aura into that of a devil lord. Unfortunately, she still hadn't finished transforming into a demon yet. If she died in battle right now, she would likely be forced to become an undead. Devils had weak bloodlines to begin with. For devils, it was only natural that their power level would be reduced if they were forced to change their body and elemental attributes at the last moment. I didn't have any hopes at all that Ilmigia would be able to stop the devil for long. After all, this devil lord was famous for her ability to play both sides and double-cross. You can't rely on others. Hurry up and finish off the opponent before you. Omar, how much longer do you intend to sleep for? My angry roar echoed in the skies above the mountain of putrefaction. The ice tower's danger was now on the countdown. At this moment, I was absolutely determined to kill the Lord of Putrefaction. I was also mentally prepared to pay the price of having the entire mountain of putrefaction destroyed. I had no time to waste on him any longer. Love and peace. That's my creed. What responded to me was a deep male voice and disgustingly oily muscles. Stretching his biceps forward in the Hercules pose and exposing his chest muscles to the side, each of his bodybuilding movements became even more perfect. After receiving the bonus from Hell King's evolution, Omar's changes could be said to be the greatest, but also the smallest. He had grown much taller. and his appearance had become much more handsome and elegant. He even wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, and he now had the scholarly aura of a literary girl. But the only things that hadn't changed were his exaggerated muscles and his abnormal sense of beauty when he only wore underwear. Just looking at Omar's abnormal body-twisting calisthenics made me feel incredibly annoyed. I felt like I was going to go crazy. I had always felt that the unlucky ones who were sent to this hell were the unluckiest. After all, they had to receive double punishments. And seeing such a Hell King was probably far crueler than the hell itself. My stomach cramped up as I watched the King of Hades suddenly jump out of the mountain and sing about love and peace. I had to take 2 deep breaths to calm myself down. Only now did I learn that even the Lord of Hades had the ability to vomit. How is this possible? Ladvioka was quite astonished. Although his dimensional combination sealing curse couldn't compare to the 4 elemental seals, it was on the same level. Omar's seal clearly hadn't been broken. So how had he come out? Kill him. Of course, I wouldn't tell him the answer. Ladvioka no longer had any subordinates, so this was a perfect opportunity to understand Omar while he was at his weakest. Killing him would be ineffective, and sealing him would be ineffective. I might as well make him hesitate in his confusion. Foolish mortals. This is my father's ingenious plan. He knew long ago that you fellows would use sealing abilities, so of course he made preparations. Right now, we're all part of the Infernos, and as long as we leave the 7 hells for a short period of time, our physical bodies will automatically collapse and die. And our new physical bodies will be reborn in the Infernos. We are eternal and indestructible. We cannot be stopped. We are in pain. My father, why did you hit me? All right then, if it wasn't for the fact that the situation wasn't right, I wouldn't have only hit him. I would have even wanted to kill him. As expected of the incarnation of pride, Ladvioka's ability to die from talking too much was a perfect example. Not only did he explain why he wasn't afraid of being sealed, he even exposed his weakness of being unable to leave the Infernos for an extended period of time. But judging from Ladvioka's increasingly astonished expression, knowing the reason didn't mean that the problem could be solved. Since Omar's undying nature was impossible to seal, Ladvioka had been forced into a corner. Let's connect. Let this idiot know just how powerful you 2 brothers are. Of course, I hadn't awakened Omar just to hear him reveal his weakness. Envy and pride were unique concepts. The former would steal from others to strengthen itself, while the latter would simultaneously strengthen itself and others by ruling over others. Their abilities didn't conflict with each other. In fact, they could even complement each other from the very start. The bone giant lowered its head and instantly swallowed Omar. The next instant, the entire bone giant began to undergo a mysterious change. Envy the Titan evolved once again. While Roland was going all out and intending to have Ladvioka appear first, Cavendish was smiling as he walked through the snow in the Infernos of the Lost Heart, the 4th hell. This time, I finally tricked him. That's right, when Roland tossed out a teleportation portal to lure Cavendish into it. He hadn't actually entered it at all. He had only sent a clone into it, while his true body was searching for the Tower of Ice in the endless Infernos of Ice. Roland was quite careful in hiding his items. The Tower of Ice was located deep within the snowy mountains, where the snow and ice were the densest. Even if he had an insider to guide him, finding the Tower of Ice in the vast Infernos of Ice would be a difficult and time-consuming task, especially since the rules here were incredibly unfriendly to finding the way. The Infernos of the Lost Heart was just as its name suggested. It was a place where sinners who were too cold, lazy, unfilial, and neglected their loved ones would be punished. Roland's punishment for the sinners here was incredibly cruel. They would have to search for their own hearts in confusion. You people don't know how to love others, nor do you accept others' love. In that case, what's the point of keeping your memories and hearts? The entire Infernos of Ice was covered in snowy plains, snowy mountains, and hills. However, all the environments and sceneries were similar. No matter where you looked, it was all snow white. This was a natural labyrinth, and the sinners' hearts were cut into countless pieces. The demons randomly threw them somewhere, and the souls that lost their hearts would continuously lose their memories. Before they completely forgot who they were, they had to find the pieces of their hearts in order to recover a portion of their past memories. As for whether or not anyone could find all of them, probably not. This didn't seem like a cruel punishment, but in the future, it would be named as the cruelest punishment in the Seven Infernos. Let's not talk about its sinister and cruel intentions for now. After all, that wasn't the main point right now. Just this natural labyrinth alone was enough to cause Cavendish, who wasn't very good at finding his way, to feel at a loss. And before he could go berserk from the unchanging snowy scenery, Cavendish finally met the first person who took the initiative to greet him. The tall and slender Queen of Lust smiled and waved her hand. It was just a ripple, but it was enough to disperse all the snow and ice in this place. I've finally met someone. Beautiful lady, could you take me to the Tower of Ice? As a bystander, Roland's clone felt that Cavendish's smile was quite foolish. This seemed to be a provocation, and it would be quite easy to attract hatred. But what happened next made Roland feel like he was the greatest idiot. The Queen of Temptations, Ilmigia's reply was quite direct. Her tall and slender body pounced on Roland and gently hugged Roland's small body. Then, she lowered her head and kissed Roland. That lingering French kiss caused all the bystanders to be stunned, and Ilmigia's passionate reply almost caused Roland to choke on his breath. Of course I can. I'll show you the way. That's why I'm here. My prince, my closest lover, my most adorable lover. Chapter 468. Boss Ale, you tricked me. Of course, I wouldn't doubt Ale at all. He had already sacrificed everything for the sake of his plan. But now, I already knew who had leaked the secret of the Hades. Ilmigia, you actually dared to betray me? I was filled with regret, but there was no medicine for regret. Perhaps I had trusted Ale's abilities too much, but I never expected that Ale would make such a mistake one day. The Devil Lords weren't actually united, and there was actually a traitor among ALS old companions. After all, even without ALS guarantee, the other Devil Lords had already shown their sincerity. Of the 4 most ancient Devil Lords, 3 had already used their actions to prove their sincerity. 2 of the Devil Lords had already transformed into demons of the Hades, becoming the guardians of the new cycle of reincarnation and Hades. This meant that they would forever be bound to the Hades in the future, making it impossible for them to betray me. The Lord of Despair, who was still active in the outside world, had used Lady Storm as a sign of his loyalty. This was also the equivalent of having a falling out with the Chaos faction. El had also given him a series of major missions in the world of He. It was evident that Ale was trustworthy. The 3 Devil Lords' sincerity and AL's trust in me made me overlook that something was wrong with the last Devil Lord. Just now, I had thought that the current Hades aura wasn't enough to complete Ilmigia's transformation. I never expected that the truth was that Ilmigia was intentionally delaying the transformation. In that case, Ilmigia's stance was suspicious from the very start. But looking at it from a different angle, it was impossible for Ilmigia to be a loyal supporter of the Chaos faction. After all, as long as she leaked our grand plan to the will of the Chaos Abyss, it would have been impossible for our plan to succeed. From the moment that Ilmigia knew about our plan but didn't report it, she had already betrayed the Chaos faction. Benefits? Faction? Just which side is she on? Or is she on one side? Unlike the maniacal and chaotic demons, Sly Devils were all the best liars and schemers. The only possible reason for her to simultaneously betray Ale and the Chaos faction was a sufficiently large benefit for her. She wasn't a main god, so the benefits she could obtain would be limited. She would definitely need a powerful backer, and someone who could provide her with sufficient benefits and support would definitely be a powerful main god. As I watched the 2 of them kissing, I understood everything. Cavendish, how dare you trick me? Ilmigia belongs to you. Unknowingly, Cavendish, who had reverted to his normal size, popped his head out from the domineering woman's chest. First, he proudly gave my clone a thumbs up, as though he was saying, "Aren't you envious, you old bachelor?" Then, the thumb turned into a middle finger and the clone instantly exploded. My vision returned to pitch black. I was tricked by a single cell. I was actually deceived by this pig head. His mind was already filled with anger, but his heart was calmer. Looking at Cavendish's proud and boastful appearance, it was obvious that all of this was planned by this guy. What does he intend to do? Isn't he on Cynthia's side? What can he possibly gain from betraying her? Ilmigia knew about Ilmigia's betrayal and didn't report it to the will of the Chaos Abyss. Of course, Cavendish knew about Ilmigia's betrayal and didn't report it to the will of the Chaos Abyss. I didn't even dare to look at the Chaos Abyss prince betraying the will of the Chaos Abyss. There is far too much information and possibilities in my mind, making it difficult for me to grasp them all. However, there was one thing that was quite clear. No matter what he does, we absolutely can't let him succeed. It was now meaningless to send another clone. It would be impossible not to use a sufficient amount of power against a Devil Lord and a Demon Main God. And right now, the Lord of Putrefaction was still bothering me, so he actually lost enough strategic value and wasn't that important anymore. Omar, use chain mode. We don't have much time. Let's overload and stomp this scared insect to death. Indeed, in my eyes, the current Ladvioka was nothing at all. Perhaps he still had the power level of a main god, but he was no longer the valiant and decisive general he had been on the battlefield. The immemorial Inferno demon, who had been so powerful in the Holy War, had lost his ambition to return to the battlefield and was now focusing on raising his own army. This was the equivalent of denying everything in the past and starting all over again. Perhaps Ladvioka believed that this would allow him to have his own army's combat strength, while also making up for his lack of personal power as a commander. But for me, this was the equivalent of splitting his energy in half, with half of it being something completely unrelated to his natural talents. Perhaps he had enough power and time to obtain benefits, but if he walked a path that conflicted with his own natural talents and personality, he would definitely end up spending twice the effort for half the result. It would be meaningless to judge another person's path. The elves who were used to cultivating both magic and martial arts would still be able to easily defeat ordinary human warriors and mages with their natural talents and lifespans. But now, Ladvioka was no longer connected to the multiple dimensions that he controlled, and his army was trapped by the Mountain Inferno's traps and the Hades dimensional laws of death. Ladvioka had indeed become the weakest main god in all of the Hades, a breakthrough point for us. No matter the cost, no matter the consequences, let's kill him. My order surprised Omar, but he didn't hesitate as he directly joined the Bone Giants. Slaughter. Break. I've never felt so strong before. The Bone Giants with Marsalit as the core were only capable of maintaining the most basic of combat ideals. But when Marsalit poured all of his power into creating his organs, Omar took over his thoughts, and an entire Bone Giant was reborn. Omar was the emperor of the undead to begin with. All the undead connected to him would become a part of him. His calculation abilities were also far superior to Marsalit's. To use an inappropriate analogy, if all of the 7 original sins were to be compared to a single person, Marsalit would be the spinal cord and nerves that connected him, while Omar would be the brain that directed the entire body's actions. Omar's barely pieced together body would only be able to move based on instinct, while the physical body controlled by the brain would be capable of exquisite slaughter. Perhaps Omar's personal abilities weren't strong enough to support such a powerful physical body, but his natural talent of the more undead he ruled over, the stronger he would become, made him the strongest CPU and stabilizer. But just this alone wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be enough to kill a main god. If I wanted to win, I needed to be even stronger. Against such an opponent, there was no time for me to be distracted. After I cast aside all distracting thoughts, I lowered my head and touched the ground I was standing on, the Bone Giant skull. Envy. Pride. I almost forgot sloth, a tremendous amount of Hades's divine power transformed into actual concepts. Purple, green, and blue. These 3 colors represented 3 different types of soul light, representing the 3 sides of my soul. Yet, all of them were poured into the Bone Giant. The Bone Giant's entire body was twisting and changing. Thick bone spikes began growing out of his forelimbs. His right fist became abnormally sharp, and his lower limbs began to lighten. His tailbone lengthened, and wings extended from his back. Unlike the monster that had been pieced together purely based on instinct, the bone giant was now actively improving his physical body, or rather, evolving it. As mentioned before, power levels represented the level at which a person could develop their own potential. Saint rank was a clear definition of one's own path and perfect future, which represented a soul world. And the next step, myth rank, was a projection of one's own concepts, transforming them into actual objects that would further perfect one's own path in reality. This was incredibly difficult. The great majority of swordsmen would choose to pour their own concepts into their personal weapons. Not only would this increase their combat strength, it would also allow them to continuously improve their understanding of concepts in the future. The end result would be the creation of a large number of divine weapons, or so-called myth-ranked weapons. And as the master's power level improved, these weapons could even evolve into semi-god equipment. Of course, this wasn't the only option. Some myth-ranked individuals would even pour their concepts into their own physical bodies in order to strengthen their physical bodies and improve their supernatural abilities. Some would fuse their concepts with their own soul worlds, greatly increasing their power level. But the publicly acknowledged option with the least side effects and the least chance of making a mistake was still a personal weapon. The main reason was that if you made a mistake, you could always start over again. I had once reached semi-god rank. At myth rank, the concepts I was most skilled in were death and soul. That was how the widely known Yonya Darkness War came into being. And this time, I had once again reached this level or even higher. Among the Hades, the 7 original sins became my first choice of concepts. Pouring my concepts into my personal weapons? That's such a waste. Just look at my children. They're the best vessels for my power. My children, I bestow upon you the blessings of envy, sloth, and pride. Evolve. Surpass the limits of this world. The undead creations of the 7 original sins combined with the concepts of the 7 original sins. What better combination could there be? Envy, pride, and sloth. The power of the 3 original sins began to strengthen and distort the bone giant's body. The bone giant wasn't satisfied with the overly high speed of evolution, and the bone giant's abnormal bones actually started pulling out bone tendrils. The bone giant transformed into a demonic egg and took another great step forward in evolution. Ladvioka didn't have the habit of just sitting around and watching his enemy finish their preparations for battle. He once again attacked with his greatsword and Inferno Whip. However, a large hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his Inferno Whip. His greatsword didn't even have the time to break through the bone armor's outer layer. Ladvioka felt a mysterious sense of fear when he saw the broken bone egg staring at him with a single red eye. He felt as if his end had arrived. With a whip, a fling, and a smack, the gigantic Ladvioka was flung to the ground like a clumsy hen before he could even let go of the Inferno Demon Whip. Envy shall grant you the ability to contain all types of energy and biological structures. There shall be no path to your growth. You are destined to become the top of the food chain. You shall toss the so-called theory of evolution into the trash. What sort of monster was this that had revealed its bone egg? Its entire body was composed of bone. However, the bone wings on its left resembled those of dragons, while the bone wings on its right resembled those of demons. The horn on its tiger-shaped skull was currently gathering frightening energy. The flames in its eyes were a forbidden spell capable of stealing souls. One of its increasingly deformed arms was a heavy hammer, while the other was a dragon's head that desired to tear apart flesh and blood. If it wasn't for the gigantic dragon's tail that roamed the mountains, it was likely that it wouldn't have been able to maintain its center of gravity. Pride shall grant you the most stable of souls and physical bodies. You are the amalgamation of countless souls and physical bodies. Only the will of the highest level will be able to unite all those countless souls, allowing a monster like you that can't possibly exist to act under a single will. Omar, my undead prince, I've already given you a stage to show off. Show me and prove that you're my most outstanding child. Soulfire lit up in the gigantic beast's eyes. This gigantic beast was as nimble as a kung fu kid. With a single step, he approached his prey. The next instant, he raised the heavy hammer on his arm and smashed it down heavily at the Demon King who had fallen to the ground. Damn it! The venerated Demon King showed off how ball rolled. The heavy hammer didn't hit its target. It only grazed Ladvioka's right hand as he howled in pain. Ladvioka lost his right hand. And this was only the beginning. Sloth shall grant you the memories and soul of merciless slaughter. You shall become the purest slaughterer and judge. A silver holy light landed on the gigantic beast's body. With a single point, silver chains bound Ladvioka, who was constantly trying to escape. As the judge of law, the gigantic beast was using the power of law to judge this evil invader from the chaos abyss. Thou art guilty. The power level of the silver chains had already surpassed that of a so-called main god. Ladvioka kept howling in pain when he discovered that he was actually unable to fight back. I shall name you the Beast of Apocalypse. A name represented power. A true name represented the universe and a mortal plane's acknowledgement of its existence. At this moment, the Beast of Apocalypse completed another leap in strength. Its frightening aura actually created a power level difference that locked Ladvioka in place. The Beast of Apocalypse, who brought about the twilight of the gods, roared terrifyingly, causing the entire mortal plane to tremble in fear. He was no longer a hastily assembled product. His explosive power was even more destructive. All of his organs had been created for combat. No, the most foundational change was that he had just been a hastily assembled machine. Now that he had a true body, he was like a powerful individual with flesh, blood, and soul. Originally, it was 578 seconds. Now, there's 167 seconds left. Has the collapse actually sped up? Still, a mass-produced machine is completely different from a custom-made machine. This investment was worth it. The countdown that Ladvioka had just calculated was the Beast of Apocalypse's collapse. The time limit for the Beast of Apocalypse's collapse was actually less than 3 minutes. Ladvioka didn't intend to waste any more seconds. Since the Beast of Apocalypse was about to completely collapse, it was more than enough to take down a main god-level demon with it. Ladvioka still didn't give up even though he was in dire straits. However, the approaching Beast of Apocalypse had already begun enjoying its feast. At 124 seconds, Ladvioka lost his second arm. The Beast of Apocalypse swallowed his beheader sword in one gulp. At 79 seconds, Ladvioka's head was twisted 180 degrees for the second time. This time, it was too late to regenerate. Ladvioka was now in dire straits. At 46 seconds, Ladvioka's gigantic body was directly split into 16 pieces. It was now impossible to put them back together again. At 37 seconds, Ladvioka's final inferno explosion ignited the entire mountain inferno. The entire mortal plane was reborn, and the Chaos faction finally welcomed its first main god to perish. Countless meteors streaked through the various planes. Ladvioka's final screams of pain caused countless dimensional rulers to tremble in fear. The other supreme existences of the Seven Hells were also at a loss as to what to do as they faced a new opponent. Perhaps Ladvioka still had a backup plan. Perhaps another little demon had appeared somewhere else, but at the very least, Ladvioka's soul hadn't appeared in the Hades or the River Styx. Even if Ladvioka could be revived, he was destined to be absent from this final holy war. Meanwhile, in the Hell of the Heartless, Cavendish was laughing and flirting with a female demon as he headed straight for the Tower of Ice. Ladvioka's final screams didn't even make him turn around. However, an unfamiliar yet familiar figure appeared in front of him, blocking his path. The flame seemed Martianus? I don't believe that Ladvioka, who's so soft-hearted to his own people, would allow you to enter the Hades, nor do I believe that you'll be able to stop us. Fine, don't glare at me. Sister-in-law Eliza, I was right. My older brother has gone too far, hasn't he? The mortal girl in maid attire lightly shook her head, lifted her skirt, and smiled as she bowed. This is my personal choice. This time, I shall stand by his side forever. Chapter 469. Inferno Explosion was the most disgusting ability of Inferno demons. For adventurers, Inferno demons were probably the most annoying of all demons. After all, it was common for adventurers to work so hard to defeat a high-level Inferno demon, only to lose everything in the demon's maniacal laughter and flames. On the battlefield of order and chaos, the red figures who led the charge into enemy formations and laughed maniacally as they summoned meteor explosions and hellfire rain would always strike fear in the hearts of others. However, what left an even deeper impression in people's minds was that when they were forced to the brink, a single Inferno explosion would turn a strategic high ground into a deep pit, turn a town into ruins, and wipe out an entire army. All the heroes who surrounded them would die together with them. The most disgusting part was that it was very difficult for demons to completely die. If they self-destructed their incarnations or clones, although the power of the self-destruction would be small, the damage to their main body would be minimal. And even if they self-destructed their main body, as long as they had enough backup plans, the damage from the self-destruction wouldn't be fatal. They could even transfer their souls to their descendants. Even if they had to evolve from the very beginning, it wouldn't be difficult for them to grow with their previous accumulations and connections. Usually, even if they managed to kill off an Inferno demon, they would return to being a hero 300 or 400 years later. However, only a small portion of existences knew that Inferno demons wouldn't choose to self-destruct unless they had absolutely no other choice or had entered a state of insanity. That would be even greater than the loss of an incarnation. Self-destruction wasn't unique to Inferno demons. Elemental creatures, especially fire elemental creatures, were also hot. In fact, many mages loved to self-destruct. But out of all the self-destruction spells, Archmage's final attack was known to be the most destructive. After all, a mage's accumulated mana over many years wouldn't just detonate their life force, but also their souls that had gathered together with their mana. Inferno Demon's Inferno Explosion was roughly equal in power to Archmage's final attack. This was because Inferno Demons didn't only detonate their own life force, but also a mixture of fire element mana and chaos essence. This meant that even if Inferno Demons self-destructed their clones, they would definitely lose a portion of their chaos essence and lose power levels. The essence of the Abyss was necessary for a demon to evolve. It was the best reward that the will of chaos gave to a demon. It was the purest form of chaos origin energy, as well as the source of energy for a demon that was equivalent to a true god's divine power. Losing the essence of the Abyss was the same as wasting years of hard work and having to start all over again. In the mortal plane, if a god or god envoy's clone was killed, the loss would usually be negligible. The lost power could be recovered with time. However, if a high-level demon lost a power level, his subordinates and enemies would never miss such a good opportunity. That was why many Inferno demons would rather lose their clones than choose to self-destruct. Only in a factional battlefield like the Holy War would it be possible to see Inferno demons self-destruct on a large scale. Inferno demons would be a powerful weapon to break the strategic balance. The will of the Chaos Abyss would control the Inferno demons, and the Inferno demons wouldn't have any choice at all. It was only natural that they would be drained of all their remaining value. Perhaps even an army's destructive self-destruction wouldn't be as frightening as Ladvioka's self-destruction. Ladvioka was an elder demon main god who had experienced at least 2 holy wars. The mana and essence of the Chaos Abyss that he had accumulated was incalculable. If he exploded all of this in an instant, any so-called forbidden spell would be nothing more than a tiny spark in front of him. If I had a choice, I wouldn't want to force an Inferno demon to the brink either. But the situation back then, with the collapsing apocalyptic beasts and the Inferno demons fighting to the death, it was impossible for Roland to hold back. Holding back would be the same as committing suicide. Ladvioka, the oldest Inferno demon king, unhesitatingly chose the fiercest counterattack. At that moment, when the entire mountain Inferno exploded and Roland and the other two original sins entered the revival phase, the entire Hades trembled from that frightening explosion. And this was the result of Roland ignoring everything else and breaking through Ladvioka's defenses. He forcefully tore off an important part from a main god-level demon's body. If Ladvioka had successfully self-destructed, it would have been too late. That's half of the oldest Inferno demon's heart. And for demons, the heart is a special part. When Roland desperately tore off that half of the Lord of Putrefaction's heart, he hadn't done it to reduce the power of the Lord of Putrefaction's self-destruction. That was because the Lord of Putrefaction's self-destruction would definitely send him back to the Pillar of Law to be revived. Roland had done it for the last time he saw the beautiful figure standing in front of the Pillar of Ice by herself. Roland was no longer able to deliver his present to her, which was why he called out to a name that everyone had already forgotten. He hoped that Roland would be able to help him, even if they were already enemies. And before Ladvioka's incomplete body was reduced to ashes in the explosion, Roland gave his final blessing as he looked at the figure in the snow. Live on, Eliza. Her long silver hair fluttered in the wind. Beneath her gold-rimmed spectacles was her usual expressionless face. It was just that Eliza wasn't in a good state right now. Her black and white lace dress was filled with sword slashes, and she couldn't stop the blood from flowing out of her mouth. The wound on her right arm was still hanging limply, and it was evident that she had lost all feeling in it. And this was only the result of Cavendish holding back with his sword. There's actually such a huge difference between us. Her vision was now hazy. Her physical injuries were only a part of it. What was injured was her very source. Demon Marchioness hadn't even been able to use her combat form before she was seriously injured by the Abyss Prince's sword attack. Even though she still had the will to fight to the end, the tremendous difference in power level made the so-called will to fight meaningless. At that moment, she even considered using an Inferno explosion. But the next instant, she discovered that Cavendish had actually sealed off even this possibility. That's right, Ladvioka wasn't the only Inferno demon in the entire Hades plane. As the Fire Sea Marchioness, Eliza had successfully evolved by absorbing the fire elemental god's power level. Naturally, she was an Inferno demon that was the result of combining the essence of the Chaos Abyss and fire element magic. But even though the current Eliza was already powerful enough, the difference between the two of them was far too great. One was a demon Marchioness who had instantly become a demon Marchioness, while the other was a favored child of the Chaos Abyss, an existence with the highest power level in the world. If it wasn't for the fact that Roland had gone easy on her, Eliza probably would have already died. Cavendish continued to smile as he continued forward. However, Eliza blocked his way once again. Her eyes were still cold and rational, but they represented the complete desire for battle. Sister-in-law just obediently lied down on the ground. Don't make things difficult for me. I'm doing something important right now. Besides, if I really kill you, my older brother will probably go all out against me. Carwins awkwardly scratched his head. However, he suddenly smiled in delight, as if he had recalled something interesting. The Abyss Prince smiled as innocently as a child. He seemed to be a little shy, a little troubled, and also a little excited. Then won't I be able to see my older brother seriously taking revenge on me? Huh, now that I think about it, I'm really looking forward to it. Don't tempt me into killing you. Cavendish slowly extended his finger with an unknown, frightening pressure. At this moment, he mysteriously became serious. This sudden thought bloomed in his chaotic mind. His powerful curiosity and anticipation drove him to take action. He actually really wanted to see what Roland would do after he killed Eliza. Perhaps the unknown itself was the most interesting thing to Roland. If you die, he'll probably go all out against me. He'll probably swing his sword at me with a belly full of hatred and regret. Perhaps just this reason alone is enough for me to kill you right now. Roland's calm words seemed to have already sentenced Eliza to death. But even so, Eliza continued to coldly look at him. She had no intention of moving out of his way at all, as if she was someone else who was about to die. My little lover, don't forget our goal. It's not a good habit to cause unnecessary trouble. However, the King of Temptation suddenly walked out and used a gentle embrace to stop Cavendish's killing intent towards Eliza. Besides, we have a new guest now. Don't let him laugh at us. The Devil Lord Carwins looked at the nearby Tower of Ice. There, an existence that couldn't be ignored was currently paying attention to this place. Before Carwins even finished speaking, a blue figure suddenly appeared above everyone's heads. This figure was quite large and wore an exquisite crown on his head. His upper body was as muscular as a Hercules, while his lower body was a colorful fishtail. His facial features were quite handsome, but he had a bitter expression. His blue eyes were filled with sorrow, as if he had just met the most tragic fate in the world. Even though he was clearly standing there, he seemed to exist between reality and illusion, making it difficult for anyone to grasp his exact location. The Devil Lord Carwins lowered his head and held a crimson red stone in his hand. This stone was constantly beating as if it was a living heart. That's right, this was the gift that Roland had entrusted to Carwins, the Inferno Demon's heart. Inferno demons were immune to fire damage. Hearts were the source of demons' power. Naturally, they would also be immune to the same type of damage. After that explosion that destroyed everything, this half of the Inferno Demon's heart that had been torn off was the only thing left behind from that astonishing explosion. The Devil Lord Carwins simply used his back to protect Eliza. He handed the stone, the half of the Inferno Demon's heart that Roland had torn off from the Lord of Putrefaction, to Eliza, who had a surprised expression. That person wanted me to give this to you. Originally, I didn't intend to help him. After all, even if he revived me, he forced my little mermaid to die. I still intended to settle the score with him. But seeing how stubborn you are, I feel as if I'm looking at my equally stubborn little mermaid. That's why I'm helping you, not helping that heartless bastard. When the Blue Devil Lord Carwins turned around, his sorrowful eyes seemed as if he was mourning the death of all living things in the world. The next instant, all of his fighting spirit transformed into pure killing intent. This was divine might that was as fierce as a tsunami. This was pure power that caused all living things to mourn. A main god level true god, Cavendish was rather astonished. He had no recollection of such a person. A main god that suddenly appeared would definitely be more than enough to easily break the balance of the battlefield. It was impossible to ignore such an existence from the very start. However, Ilmigius sucked in a breath of cold air. This devil lord, who also had a long history, recognized this main god. Stonevilla? The ancient sea god Stonevilla. How could you possibly still be alive? You should have died long ago. Chapter 470. The ancient sea god Stonevilla, the husband of the water elemental goddess Aelos, was rumored to have challenged the goddess of Order's authority in ancient times and was the strongest main god back then. The term strongest was always a bit vague, but back in the day, there were multiple main gods in the sea god system with him as the core. His power was enough to challenge the goddess of Order's authority. And unlike later generations, where people believed in gods, the ancient gods all relied on their own power to reach where they were. They were incredibly powerful, and Roland was able to make multiple main gods listen to his commands. Even Lady Storm was once his subordinate, and he even tried to make the goddess of Order a figurehead. This doubtlessly meant that Roland and his faction were incredibly powerful, and it was rumored that it was precisely because of his inconceivably powerful strength that he was abnormally arrogant, which led to his destruction. And when he was in trouble, apart from his wife, almost all of his subordinates not only didn't help him, they even took advantage of him in the end. Even with the enticement and secret manipulation from both major factions, it was still rare for someone to fail to such an extent. But no matter how much the legends and history belittled Roland's personality, they all described him as incredibly powerful. Perhaps I can make use of this power. Unlike most people who almost instinctively worshiped the strong, for Roland, individual power wasn't enough to win his respect. On the contrary, the personality flaws that were revealed due to being powerful would instead become the best weakness for him to take advantage of. Although most love isn't equal, I'm truly touched that Alos is so deeply in love. Perhaps I now have good hostage. Yep, in a way, Roland had already maxed out his villainous talents of being a mastermind behind the scenes, coercion and bribery, and hostage-taking and extortion. His initial desire to be a good person seemed to have been destined to go astray from the very beginning. By the way, if it wasn't for the fact that he always mysteriously became a villain, he wouldn't have wanted to become a good person. From a certain point of view, personality determined one's fate. Roland definitely hadn't gotten to where he was today by luck. He was a natural-born villain. Eliza, don't listen to this guy's nonsense. He has to protect the Pillar of Ice more than anyone else. Even if he falls again, he won't give up on the Pillar of Ice. Regenerating a Hades-level physical body wasn't an easy task. At this time, Roland was unable to move, but his will passed words of comfort to Eliza, with merciless disdain and displeasure. And he was speaking the truth. Since he knew from the very beginning that Stone Villa would revive because of the artifact and soul he had left behind, how could Roland, how could he, who lacked combat power, not take him into account? From a certain standpoint, I had indeed gone overboard. I had made a deal with Alos, using my own death as the prize for Sidon War's revival. And now, I had created a special situation that forced Sidon War to become my fighter. If I wanted to wait for the day that Alos revived, I would have to protect the Pillar of Ice. Yes, the Pillar of Ice and the revival of Alos. At this time, Roland's arrangement was very obvious. The 4 elemental pillars were the elemental thrones of the elemental plane. As the controllers and regulators of elemental power, there would naturally be elemental gods. And in the plane of Hades, there were the 4 pillar gods of Hades that Roland had repeatedly emphasized. And it wasn't easy to reach this standard. As an existence that controlled the basic concept of Hades, the minimum requirement was that he had to have once stepped into the realm of the gods, and then he had to conform to the definition of the element itself. Most importantly, he had to be dead. Yes, he had to be a dead god or a mortal with an incomplete soul to become one of the 4 pillar gods of Hades. This wasn't forcing people, but the most basic rule of death in Hades. Just like how the elemental gods of the elemental plane had to be elemental creatures, the only ones who could become the god of Hades were naturally the remnant souls of the dead. In Roland's grand plan, the dead souls would use the soul ice crystal as a temporary carrier, completely assimilating with the extreme rules of the plane of Hades, and finally resurrecting as the 4 pillar gods, becoming the immortal gods of Hades. And, as the price of resurrection, they were also destined to stay in Hades forever. And this seemingly simple requirement was actually very difficult to achieve. There was no god of ice in this world, and the only one that was related to it was the goddess of frost, an evil god of chaos. She was the incarnation of a blizzard, and her hobby was to freeze travelers who walked alone on the snowy mountains. She was as notorious as Lady Storm, a crazy woman. All Frigid Maw members with suitable attributes and power were soul creatures, and their abilities completely met the requirements. But as special existences that were souls, they didn't have the concept of death. Once they were injured too much, they would naturally dissipate and return to the snowy mountains, unable to be used at all. In the end, between killing the goddess of frost or using Alos, who had similar attributes, Roland chose the goddess of water elemental. After all, the god of elements and the pillar gods of Hades had many similarities, and the power of life represented by the water element had something in common with the life of ice. On the other hand, anyone who was mysteriously killed would have a grudge. If the goddess of frost still chose to take revenge and rebel after becoming one of the 4 pillars of Hades, then it would be very interesting. For the sake of Alos's remnant soul, I must force her to death. That was why there was that trade of a life for a life. And the development of the situation also proved that Roland's choice was correct, which made him heave a sigh of relief. And this was actually the easiest condition to achieve among the four pillar gods. From the very start, the Law faction didn't have any other options. Only Womians had relied on the power of Law to become a god. And it was precisely this condition that made the appearance of the Law god the most basic prerequisite for the grand plan. It was also precisely because Roland had successfully helped Womians ascend to godhood that Ael had made up his mind. Perfecting the concept of Law, spreading the faith of Law, sacrificing soul shards to create a divine body, and thinking of ways to help Womians obtain even more divine concepts and divine power. Probably only Roland himself knew about the difficulties and schemes he had gone through. As the most basic law of the Hades was judgment and death, the Law god and Death god had to be incredibly powerful. That was why Ael had spared no expense in the past 2 years to forcefully support Womians to the level of a powerful god. And as the only death god in the world, Ael was also duty-bound to do so. Of course, it was unknown when the pillar gods of the Hades would awaken. No, it should be said that nobody could guarantee that they would truly be able to awaken and revive. After all, even the forbidden spell that created the Hades was based on theory. The success rate was incalculably low from the very start, and nobody knew what would happen. And even if they were lucky enough to awaken, they would only be able to remain in the Hades forever. The losses and limitations would be far too great. The success rate of creating the Hades won't exceed 50%, and the success rate of reviving the pillar gods of the Hades won't exceed 50% either. You're asking me how I calculated it? Since it's either success or failure, of course it's 50%. Cough, I'm being serious. When I said this, I've already done my best and tried my best to increase the success rate. However, there are still far too many unknowns, and it's impossible to calculate the success rate. But the more we do, the more conditions we have, and the higher the success rate will naturally be. Man proposes, God disposes. That was probably the case. Roland had always told the truth, even if the truth didn't seem like a good one. The gods of ALS faction naturally didn't wish for their boss, the strongest main god, to meet such a fate. They had also considered replacing him with a divine concept related to death, such as destruction, Armageddon, guardian of the dead, and so on. Some true gods volunteered to replace him, but Ael rejected them. Yep, so it was possible for Ael to survive. Even if he personally cut off the cycle of reincarnation and the river Styx, as long as he was willing to reduce the degree of change and reduce the impact, such as temporarily taking on another divine concept, it was indeed possible for him to survive, even if it meant that he would suffer great losses. However, he still chose to transform himself into the pillar of death god of the Hades. Why? It was simply to increase the success rate of creating the Hades. Only Ael was capable of providing the purest power of death. And in order to further increase the success rate, Ael had even handed over his own skeleton. That was his backup plan in case he died. If Ael failed this time, his body and soul would be destined to be destroyed. For the sake of the Hades and the grand scheme, Ael has gambled everything. Not only did he hand over his own eternity, he also handed over his trust. He believes that even if he's not here anymore, we can still complete the grand scheme. We can't disappoint Boss Ael. As a leader, Ael didn't say anything grand that would make others sacrifice themselves. Instead, he used his own eternity as the price to choose the plan with the highest success rate. This was also the foundational reason why Roland, who had always been proud and arrogant, would sometimes half-jokingly and half-seriously call Ael boss. As for the final tower of Holy Light, while it seemed like there were many powerful individuals of the Holy Light, there were actually 0 existences that met the requirements. As previously mentioned, Holy Light job class members' growth was quite a shortcut. Those who reached the level of a god were actually all using the god of Holy Light's gifts. Holy Light, please bestow me with power. Although it seemed quite convenient to obtain power through prayers that fit the Holy Light's teachings, from a different perspective, this meant that the powerful individuals of the Holy Light were actually nothing more than the god of Holy Light servants. They weren't independent existences at all. How could such powerful individuals of the holy light possibly become the pillar of holy light that represented salvation? The holy light must be saved. That's why Estrada must die. That letter containing the soul ice crystal forced Estrada to choose death. However, Estrada smiled and calmly faced death when faced with the unreasonable requests of his favorite disciple. He even completed those harsh requests. Before his death, Estrada reinterpreted and redefined the holy light. Although he was deprived of the power of holy light, he relied on his own power to re-enter the level of a god and become a completely independent holy light individual. And so, the final requirement was fulfilled. Now, countless sacrifices were made in exchange for the establishment of the Hades. The remnant souls of the three pillar gods were all in a deep slumber within the pillar of Hades. When they woke up, the invaders of the Hades would face true rulers of the Hades. Of course, Wumians should have entered a deep slumber as well. However, the sly Roland managed to sneak in again by merging his two souls into one. Of course, this Wumian's Roland wasn't the complete pillar god. Just how powerful would the complete pillar god be? Since there was no precedent, it was impossible to calculate exactly how powerful they would be. However, as the rulers of the Hades, as the rulers of one of the four major rules of the world, it was highly likely that they would be at the level of a main god. Once they woke up, they would naturally change the entire situation. The main reason why Roland chose the strategy of delaying time was to wait for the pillar gods to wake up. Forcing the entire incomplete Hades to start operating would also provide the pillar gods with power and nourishment, urging them to wake up as soon as possible. The pillar gods were the strongest weapons of the Hades. However, they were also their only weakness. Naturally, these were the top secrets of the Hades. Unfortunately, due to a spy, all of these secrets were leaked to Cavendish. Fortunately, Roland, who was used to acting in a mysterious way, would only tell his colleagues half of the story. Even if Cavendish knew that Alos's remnant soul was in the Pillar of Ice, it was impossible for him to know that Stone Villa was about to be resurrected. Obviously, the sea god had sensed the resurrection of Stone Villa, but he had remained silent. Obviously, he didn't want to become Roland's volunteer fighter. However, since his wife had become one of the pillar gods of the Hades, unless he hardened his heart and left his wife, he had already been tied to the pirate ship from the beginning. His disappearance and silence were a form of resistance and dissatisfaction. However, in front of a senior villain who held a hostage, it was meaningless. Roland's words dissolved his uncooperative attitude. Once the pillar of God's soul is destroyed, even if the Hades are lucky to survive, the pillar gods in it will definitely be finished. We won't have another chance to use the four elements to create the world. When this sentence lingered in the sky above the Pillar of Ice, Stone Villa, who had disappeared without a trace, suddenly appeared. If Eliza dies, Alos, I don't have a girlfriend, so don't expect to have a wife. Thus, Stone Villa, who had originally planned to watch Eliza die, made his move. Sidemore's words were a blatant threat. If anyone dared to say such a thing back when he was at his peak, Sidemore would have long since killed them. But now, Sidemore could only obediently go into battle and become Sidemore's fighter. As for those tsundere, retorts, and opening lines, we can forgive him. As an ancient big shot, he still needed face, and his lines still had to be a little fierce. Look, I wanted a battle on my own. Yes, at least he couldn't let others see that he was forced to go into battle as a fighter. As for whether Roland was worried about the other party's revenge, offend him? What's there to be afraid of? His wife is in my hands, and he'll be my employee for the rest of his life. Roland probably wouldn't be able to accomplish his goal in this lifetime of successfully clearing his name and becoming a good person. This style made him seem like an evil villain and the worst kind of kidnapper. Currently, Stone Villa was in his strongest state. Even without that bastard's threat, Alos's remnant soul was right behind him in the Tower of Ice, so there was no way for him to retreat. So don't worry, let that employee be your meat shield. Since you want to become stronger, then accept my gift. When all the information entered Eliza's mind, While she was angry that Roland had hidden so many things from her and was such a bastard, the expressionless Eliza was actually quite delighted. At the very least, he remembers my abilities. This is probably the first gift he's giving me. All right then, from a certain standpoint, Eliza's path of love was so difficult and low in requirements that others would cry. But right now, Roland had indeed given Eliza a gift that was most suitable for her. That main god-level Inferno demon's heart was now in the hands of the Inferno demon queen, who was also a main god-level Inferno demon. All the conditions had been met, and it was as if fate had returned. The scene at Sulphur Mountain City was about to repeat itself, and a new demon evolution record was about to be created. Awaken, my soul imprint, Marauder. Chapter 471. Awaken, Marauder. A commanding whisper awakened the flame, see Martianus' hidden power. The next instant, Ladvioka's marked heart began to shatter and transform into fire crystals that were directly absorbed by Eliza. Marauder was Eliza's soul imprint, as well as her stepping stone to the heavens. Elisa's soul brand was very special. In the past, the soul brand of the two beasts would always fall into a deep slumber. It didn't even have any effect on her. But at this moment, in the depths of her soul, a dragon head dripping with blood was tearing at the black beast. The two beasts were frantically fighting for their lives. But at this moment, they were fighting over half a heart that was dripping with blood. Soul imprints were the true understanding of one's own life. Everyone's path was different, so naturally there would be thousands of different soul imprints. However, the most common soul imprint was a summary and understanding of one's previous job class. Usually, the effect would be to strengthen one's abilities in a certain area. Although it seemed simple, it was an actual improvement. Many of my soul imprints were like this. The reason why I said it was usually was because this was only the most common situation. However, there would always be a group of people who didn't take the normal path. Simple buff soul imprints were simple and practical, but they were unable to change one's foundation. Some people's soul imprints could directly change a person's fighting style and power composition. There were already many examples of people reaching the heavens in a single step. Unlimited courage imprint would become stronger as long as one believed that they wouldn't lose. This allowed Cavendish to never fear powerful enemies. He was basically a hot-blooded main character. A certain beast tamer's love to protect allowed him to obtain countless subordinates. He was basically the main character of a legendary story. Diana's anti-god fool was unprecedented in history. She directly created a new job class in an entire generation. She even pointed her sword directly at the true gods. She was basically the main character of a legendary story. All right then, I admit that I was quite resentful. Compared to them, my soul imprint only had a simple buff effect. It was indeed a common item. However, Eliza's soul imprint was the most unique of all. It was impossible to use normally and had no buffs or buffs. However, it gave her a chance to reach the heavens in a single step. It could be said that this was a miracle created by Eliza's determination to become stronger. My soul confirms that I should follow my instincts and pursue my dreams. Thanks to the blessing of the goddess of chaos, all demons had the ability to devour and evolve. However, there was a limit to how much they could devour and evolve. Advancing one rank would be a great supplement, and 2 ranks would be enough for them to die. Any higher, and they would self-destruct. Eliza's soul imprint was obviously a reflection of her demonic bloodline, but it had the possibility of reaching the heavens in a single step. The Marauder soul imprint's effects were ridiculously powerful. As long as it was something that she desired, as long as it met her elemental requirements, she would be able to devour it to evolve. Back in the day, she had devoured the fire elemental god and demon count, which corresponded to the elements of fire and demon. And now, she had devoured Ladvioka's heart, which also corresponded to the elements of fire and demon. This was completely in line with Eliza's needs. This was the perfect gift for her. A demon's heart was the best magic potion ingredient. It was also the energy source for many special machines. In fact, it was even a hard currency in the lower planes. That was because they were the crystallization of a demon's lifetime of power. Devouring and evolving were the eternal themes of the Chaos Abyss. Eliza, who was favored by the Chaos Abyss, was the embodiment of this theme. Elisa's heart was instantly disintegrated. When crimson flames covered Elisa, the next instant, Elisa transformed into a fiery phantom that spread her wings and soared into the sky. The newborn Inferno demon immediately flew towards Ilmigia. A newborn demon king would need to use battle to exhaust and improve her power. Since the two main gods were already competing against each other, the Queen of Temptations was naturally the only choice. You're always walking around naked. I've long since disliked you. All right then. Ilmigia's angry roar was filled with undisguised personal resentment. It seemed that she had another reason for choosing the Queen of Temptations as her opponent. Hee, of course I have to show off my good figure. You're probably angry that your man always sneaks glances at me, aren't you? As Ilmigia giggled, she even proudly winked at Roland. But then, she was unable to smile anymore, as the fire shadow tossed out a flame spear that instantly covered the entire sky, forcefully sending Ilmigia back to the ground as she had just flown up. Cough, cough. Using energy in such a crude manner is such a waste. Ilmigia, who was covered in dust, wasn't injured at all. Even though she was the weakest of the Devil Lords, she was still an ancient, powerful individual who had survived for countless years. Eliza's overly scattered flame energy wasn't even able to pierce through Ilmigia's defenses. Ilmigia didn't even get to finish complaining, as several dozen flame spears in the sky caused her to completely shut up. Not only was the energy released by Ilmigia like a nouveau riche, there was also something faintly within those flame spears that made Ilmigia instinctively feel threatened. Hiding a fatal attack in a seemingly harmless large-scale AoE spell. Such a simple tactic. All right then, Ilmigia, who was used to using useless words to disturb her opponents, completely shut up this time. She didn't even dare to come into contact with the green smoke coming from the flame spears. Ladvioka's true essence of the Chaos Abyss? You're quite generous. The true essence of the Chaos Abyss was a gift from the Chaos Abyss. It was the core of chaos, the accumulation of a demon's entire life. It was also a necessary item for a demon to improve themselves. When the true essence of the Chaos Abyss was used as a one-time use item to attack, it was basically the equivalent of directly detonating a nuclear reactor. The seemingly light green smoke was actually a fatal threat. Even Ilmigia didn't dare to come into contact with it. Eliza didn't respond. She simply reflexively spread out the faint green smoke. This time, not only was Ilmigia trying to hide, even the two main gods on the battlefield reflexively moved away from the poison mist. The flames and poison mist transformed the snow-white battlefield into a dangerous domain. Eliza was willing to pay any price to throw herself into this battle, which made things rather difficult for the Queen of Temptations, who wasn't used to direct combat. She tried to avoid the poison mist and use a battle of attrition to weaken Ladvioka. However, the Queen of Temptations didn't know that this seemingly important power was actually useless against Eliza. Just like how Ladvioka was able to split his attention between two major domains, the King of Putrefaction's true essence of the Chaos Abyss was actually split into two major parts. One part was the power of putrefaction, while the other part was the Inferno demon's true essence. The latter was naturally nourishment for Eliza, while the former was obviously impossible to digest, so it was better to use it as a one-time use item. Currently, Eliza's entire body was spewing flames. She casually tossed out endless fire seas and fire spears that resembled forbidden spells, but that wasn't a good thing either. She was no longer able to control her ever-increasing power and needed to vent it through battle. Of course, the most important thing for her to do right now was to find a place to properly digest and organize her power. However, that was obviously impossible right now. That was why Ilmigia changed her way of thinking. She decided to toss out the impurities and uncontrollable power in her body as a consumable item. This was no different from burning one soul to create an endless amount of firepower. Plus, Silmigia had plenty of misgivings, so she actually gained the upper hand. Compared to the rather gentle battle between the two main gods, the battle between the main gods was far crueler and more direct. Chapter 472. When talking about the sea gods, ordinary people would always think of the current sea god, Osweir. Even though the surface area of the ocean in Aichi wasn't several times larger than the surface area of the land, the ruler of the ocean, whose surface area was almost equal to the surface area of the land, still made people respect him. Osweir rarely appeared in public. It was rumored that he had many incarnations. When he was in a good mood, a beautiful petrel would bring a lost ship out of a dead end. When he was in a bad mood, an abnormally large seabed octopus would cause an entire island to fall silent. Lady Storm was only able to control the areas around the coastline and the sea tribes that used to be part of the landwater tribes. Osweir actually controlled the same amount of territory as all the land species. However, he used a method of governing by doing nothing. Although there were many legends about him, there was actually very little reliable information. The fact that he was able to stay out of multiple holy wars and ignore the requests of both major factions was already a testament to his strength. I learned from the ancient gods that the depths of the ocean were a completely different world. There were still various deep-sea sea tribes and sea gods there. Their civilizations had already broken away from the mainland. As for the mysterious and powerful Osweir, even the previous sea god, who was in the same generation as his grandfather, was once a subordinate of the ancient sea god Stonevilla. It was rumored that they were even relatives. It was likely that in terms of seniority and past glory, none of the current main gods could compare to Stonevilla. Asterisk Clang. Asterisk the trident that was formed from ice water suddenly knocked against the ground, causing large amounts of ice and snow to melt into ice water. Meanwhile, the pillar of ice seemed to adjust its color, as if responding to the trident. The frosty white radiance now had a tinge of blue, and the snow that was constantly falling from the sky transformed into an icy, torrential rain. At Stonevilla's level, changing the natural environment around him was only a side effect. Something even stranger happened next. Many strange water creatures suddenly appeared in the heavy rain. There were dolphins, whales, seals, whales, and so on. Even rarer deep-sea monsters suddenly appeared in large numbers. The grayish-black sky that was commonly seen in the inferno was now dyed blue. Mysterious ripples appeared in the sky, as if the entire world had been transformed into an ocean. Ocean. There was no need for additional eulogies. Just a few words were enough to change the entire world. If a soul world was a miracle that could distort the normal world, then at Stonevilla's level, it would be I am the world. His personal domain began to expand, and an endless ocean appeared in the surroundings. As the reinforcement of the Hades, he received more help than that. One of the 4 pillars, the Tower of Ice, had granted him unlimited support authority. The entire world was painted blue, and the terrain was also rewritten. The mountain range had actually turned into a pool with a narrow bottom and wide top. Large amounts of rainwater kept falling, and even Cavendish's knees were submerged by the sudden rise in the water. The trident made of water was swung horizontally again, and the water that had just accumulated turned into the shapes of beasts, dolphins, sharks, and the sea beasts in the air combined with the water beasts, turning into solid objects. A shark-like water beast that was no more than 2 meters long appeared in midair, but it had the auras of bloodthirst, fanaticism, venomous fangs, and so on. It was basically like a super support priest. And a whale-shaped water beast that seemed small and exquisite suddenly opened its large mouth and emitted a soundless sound wave that caused the entire domain to tremble. This sound wave was an attack that directly targeted the soul. These temporarily constructed water beasts displayed power levels that far surpassed any so-called powerful individual. It was as if the ancient sea tribes' powerful individuals had borrowed a corpse to be reborn. A combination of soul possession and creation? No, this is simply the materialization of memories. How could Stonevilla, who had revived by himself, possibly have the souls of other powerful individuals. This was merely the reappearance of the sea beasts and sea tribes, powerful individuals in his memories. And he was able to recreate the combat prowess of an ancient existence just by relying on his personal memories and knowledge. This was far beyond the comprehension of any modern powerful individual. But after his initial astonishment, Cavendish shrugged and yawned as if he wasn't very excited. I originally heard of your reputation and thought that you'd have a lot of tricks up your sleeves. It seems that you're not even a main god anymore. The moment that he said this, Stonevilla paused and then fiercely waved his trident. Even more sea beasts appeared in response to his summons, and all of them suddenly pounced on Stonevilla. An all-out battle immediately began. And for an ancient sea god who was used to looking down on other existences, telling a lie would be an insult to himself. His silence was a tacit admission. That's right, not only was Stonevilla not a main god, strictly speaking, he was barely even a powerful god. The backup plan that he left behind before his death was indeed effective. Even though he died, Stonevilla's ocean bottle preserved his divine soul, and under the guidance of the system, Lady Storm's large amount of sea divine power became nourishment for his divine soul to recover. However, Lady Storm herself was a powerful divine power that had been quickly developed. After changing hands twice and changing elemental attributes, it was already extremely fortunate that only 1/3 of her divine power remained. In the end, the divine power that was given to Stonevilla was only enough to allow his divine soul to move slightly. Originally, the system's quest had a continuation, such as hunting sea beasts, searching for the sea god's divine blood, and so on to restore his physical body so that he could be more perfectly resurrected. But now, there was obviously no time for that. The physical body that Stonevilla was currently using was temporarily given to him by the Tower of Ice, which was completely different from his prime. The reason that he could move and even fight was because he was a champion who had leveled up by himself. If he was a rookie who had become a god through faith, his divine power would not be enough to support his divine soul, and he would directly end up in eternal slumber. And if he still had any priesthood, it would be fine. His original priesthoods, such as Ocean, king of sea beasts, the sole ruler of the seas, and so on, had all been divided up by others. Now, he had no priesthood, no believers, no territory, and yet he was a god who possessed a certain amount of divine power. He completely fit the definition of an evil god. Evil god Stonevilla. How pitiful. Cavendish really touched on Stonevilla's sore spot. He dealt with those sea beasts with ease, and even his long sword was still in its scabbard. With a casual strike, he easily shattered those water blocks. Carwins had a very clear understanding of the situation. If Sidon War was still at his peak, he would have brought down his trident a long time ago, and he would have directly clashed with Carwins. There would have been no need for him to play these seemingly beautiful tricks that were actually not lethal at all. But judging from how Stonevilla's expression kept worsening, Cavendish had indeed hit a sore spot. Gods were existences with concepts. Divine concepts and teachings would be the chains that bound them, but they would also explain how they existed and spread their concepts. And now that all of Stonevilla's divine concepts had been divided up, he didn't even have a concept of his own. He was now an evil god without any foundational foundation. If it wasn't for the fact that he was strong enough, he would have already begun to naturally dissipate. It would have been fine if he still had a physical body, but the current Stonevilla was the perfect example of how a tiger would be bullied by a dog. All revived ancient gods would face such a difficult situation. They would often hide in the mortal plane and develop their own churches and believers, stealing other gods' divine concepts, and so on. Unfortunately, Stonevilla didn't have the time to do this. He was dragged onto the battlefield. Arrogant young man. The ancient god was angrily roaring, but the new main god who had just ascended to the throne didn't care at all. Instead, he scratched his head in boredom, feeling like this was a waste of time. But suddenly, a voice echoed throughout the battlefield. Fine, I admit that I had used a clone to take advantage of the situation. How about it, God of the River Styx? ALS departure had created an opening for me. However, I didn't have the ability to confer the title of God of the River Styx. The River Styx that I was referring to was the river of souls that ran through the Hades. If I became the god of the Hades, I would naturally obtain a divine concept like undead escort, and I would naturally be able to escape my embarrassing status as an evil god. You want me to be your fighter? Don't even think about it. I admitted that I didn't have any good intentions. However, Stonevilla was indeed experienced as he instantly saw through my plan. If he agreed, he would obtain the concept of urgent need, as well as naturally become a member of the Hades. A god's first concept would be their foundation, and it would be quite difficult to change once they decided on it. In that case, I'll just make do with being the only river god of all the rivers in the land of spring. The creator gods had created the world in 7 days. Who knew how many days and months our battle had already lasted? The Titans had already completed the rough fusion of the continents above the Hades. Since there was a continent, and even a life plane with a natural cycle was about to be created, there would naturally be oceans, lakes, and rivers. In that case, it would naturally be possible to have a river god. As for why I didn't have a sea god, that was because that fragmented continent still hadn't created a region that could be called Shanghai yet. I directly sent a new map to Stonevilla. The continents that had been pieced together had countless chasms. When these chasms were filled with rainwater, the total area created by the countless tributaries would barely be comparable to an ocean. Becoming the ruler of all the rivers in this continent would be quite suitable for Stonevilla's current power level. Stonevilla was hesitating. He knew that the concept of a water god could be extended. Becoming the guardian of a river to become a sea god would be a natural progression. With this concept as a springboard, he would have a chance to challenge the current sea god in the future. Of course, the first concept would be quite difficult to change. Since Stonevilla had become the river god of the land of spring, he would naturally be connected to the land of Hades' dimensional walls. Although he wasn't under my jurisdiction, it was still impossible for me to completely abandon this plane. It was just that I would have to change hands a few times, and he would still be my fighter. However, I didn't think that Stonevilla would be able to understand the relationship between the land of spring and the land of Hades. He was most likely a river god of a separate dimension, which had nothing to do with me. This was my favorite negotiation technique. First, I would say something that was obviously a trap that the other side would never agree to. Then, I would toss out a proposal that seemed acceptable but was actually no different from the previous proposal. If the other side saw through me again, I would toss out an appropriate compromise proposal, but it would still be a trap proposal. In the end, the other side's treatment would depend on the other side power level as well as how smart they were. But obviously, if Stonevilla was smart, he wouldn't be in such a situation right now. Stonevilla glared at the main god-level demon who had the highest growth rate in all of history. He felt that Stonevilla was even more unfathomable than before. He then glanced at the pillar of ice behind him. The only thing he cared about in this world was behind him. Stonevilla directly nodded, not even giving Stonevilla the chance to say his third trap proposal. We agree. Although we were once the rulers of the seas, we also know that there's nothing wrong with temporarily living among the streams when the winds and the waves are rampant. As a leader, temporarily enduring humiliation is also the duty of a leader. Ignoring how Tsundere, Stonevilla said all this while, and ignoring how blind he was when he acted Tsundere, Stonevilla decided to accept the position of river god. The crown on his head was changed, becoming less extravagant and more simple. His temporary body, created from ice and snow now, seemed more real. At this moment, all the rivers in the land of spring now had a master, and I had recruited yet another powerful fighter into my war chariot. His power circulated in his chest, and his bloodline became even more concentrated. Stonevilla raised his head and roared angrily. His body suddenly expanded as he regained a portion of his power. Although he was only a river god, he was far stronger than an evil god who didn't have any concept of existence. Existence was power. Stonevilla's power had greatly increased, and he was just about to start punishing this young man who didn't respect his seniors at all when he suddenly sheathed his sword and said something that nobody present could understand. I surrender. Bro, I helped you screw over this bastard. Count it as a small gift. Since you calmed down, let's talk. Perhaps we have a common enemy, such as Mother Cynthia, who destroyed the Mist Kingdom. At this point, Stonevilla's normally frivolous expression now had some fanaticism and joy on it. The essence of chaos is to be unknowable, unfathomable, and uncontrollable. Chaos is something that has its own master, so why would it still be called chaos? If the Chaos Abyss has its own will, does it even deserve to be called the Chaos Abyss? It's time. It's time for the Chaos Abyss to return to chaos, so that we can obtain true freedom. Chapter 473. The pure dualism of good and evil only exists on paper. There's no such thing as an absolute divide between black and white. Everything began because of the two goddesses' divergent views on power. Compared to the mortal world's creations, they're incredibly pure. They're so pure that they drag the entire world into their divergent views. The one who gave an explanation in the end wasn't Cavendish. Instead, it was Ilmigia, who had just successfully retreated from a nearby battlefield. However, even though her entire body was charred black, she still did her best to put on a serious expression, which was rather amusing. I didn't betray my species. I only betrayed the will of the Chaos Abyss. That's why I didn't inform my species before. It's just that I need to keep this a secret. If even a tiny bit of information is leaked, all my plans will be for naught. Carwin's obviously wasn't someone who was good at explaining things. Ilmigia's mature voice had a natural allure to it, as if she intended to tell him everything that had happened. But, shut up. Cavendish, tell me. Currently, I was astonished by the information I just learned, as well as angry at how Cavendish called me Cynthia. There were some things that I only wanted to hear the answer from the person herself. As expected, the mastermind behind the destruction of the Mist Kingdom was Cynthia. Mother Cynthia? You knew the truth, yet you still recognized her as your mother, and you're even able to endure it. I'm just stating the truth, Roland. Cynthia is indeed my birth mother. You know about the so-called Children of Fate, right? Then do you know how the Children of Fate came to be? Children of Fate? You actually found out about that as well? Aren't they important chess pieces that have the deepest ties to karma, capable of changing the fate of the entire world? Yes, they were only chess pieces. Chess pieces that powerful individuals used to control the entire game. No matter how powerful they were still chess pieces controlled by the mastermind behind the scenes. No matter how hard they worked, no matter how many victories and honors they obtained, they would only bring the holy war to the next cycle. This was the case for Roland from back in the day, and it was the same for Roland in the game's history. Then, how did they manage to change the fate of all living creatures? Have you thought about it? Cavendish's words stunned me. I had only recently found out about Destiny's Child. I didn't have the time to delve into the messy matters before me. Chaos itself is unfathomable. If fate is the power of order, then breaking the shackles of fate and returning everything to the power of chaos is naturally the power of the Chaos Abyss. The so-called Child of Destiny is the Child of the Abyss, the Prince of the Abyss. Not only do I have to call Cynthia mother, you are also her child. Cavendish revealed a playful smile. Time and space are the most fundamental rules of order. Their products are the prophecies that can see through everything. As an enemy, Mother Cynthia naturally needs a Child of Destiny who can shatter all prophecies. Before every holy war, Mother Cynthia would carry out her duty as creator. She would split her own soul and give it the ability to evolve infinitely. She would construct a new artificial soul and then send it into the mortal world. The Order faction calls him the Child of Destiny, but if I had to say, it's more like shattering the Child of Destiny. It would seem that the goddess of Order Astria on your side didn't tell you the truth. No, it's very easy to see through lies to you. If she isn't an idiot, she probably didn't tell you the entire truth. So much information was revealed to me. After reviewing and summarizing, it seemed that the truth was right in front of me. Indeed, my system wasn't lying. She just didn't tell me the entire truth. This was one of my most familiar language techniques, and I was actually using it on myself. The Order faction has a great prophet so naturally the Chaos faction will have a Child of the Abyss. The previous generation's Child of the Abyss was fooled by Astria, and the Prince of the Abyss mysteriously became a pillar of order. That's already hilarious enough, but Astria still wasn't reassured. In the end, she actually killed him and tricked him into giving up his sense of self, becoming a god with no personality. He was completely finished. Roland was willing. He was unable to resist Cynthia's temptation and could fall at any moment. Shut up. Pain? Anger? Distrust? Probably both. I roared angrily in my heart. I felt an indescribable sense of frustration that made me want to raise my head and roar angrily. However, I still forced out a smile. At such a time, I couldn't allow my negative emotions to affect my judgment. Hey, bro, don't smile at me like that. It's really scary. The corner of your mouth. I wiped it with my hand, only to find that it was covered in blood. I then discovered that I had unknowingly bitten the corner of my mouth. It would seem that I had unknowingly bitten it too hard. I couldn't allow myself to be dragged along by her words and rhythm any longer. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them again as I asked in a heavy tone. Continue. What exactly happened between us back in the day? Yep. And this might very well be the last holy war. Mother Cynthia desired the strongest Child of the Abyss in all of history to defeat her old rival. No, she desired to completely destroy her old rival. As you know, the Creator Goddess is the ruler of this dimension. As long as it's a product of this dimension, it's impossible to destroy her. These words caused me to mysteriously think of a possibility that caused my hair to stand on end. However, the next instant, this guess of mine was confirmed. Perhaps you already know that the HE dimension was nearly destroyed by an invasion from another dimension. This was also the reason why the two goddesses desired to become stronger. And this invasion from another dimension also gave Mother Cynthia, who had nowhere else to go. At this moment, Cavendish paused for a moment with a malicious expression as he smiled evilly. Since this dimension doesn't have the knowledge or power to kill the Creator Goddess, perhaps another dimension will. That's why, as the Creator Goddess of this dimension, she paid a tremendous price to shatter her dimensional wall and first cast the soul of the Child of the Abyss into another dimension, allowing it to obtain the knowledge and memories of that dimension. Then, she pulled it back as if she was fishing. I fell silent. Although I had long since expected this, as there were only certainties and no coincidences in this world, the truth would always be difficult to accept. As expected, even transmigration was controlled by someone else. Were we nothing more than chess pieces from the very start? You should already know what happened next. The previous generation's Child of the Abyss was intercepted by the Order faction. The will of the Chaos Abyss directly possessed the Child of the Abyss. The result was that when Astria arrived, the remnant souls of the two goddesses fought again and forcefully tore the Child of the Abyss into two halves. And the most inconceivable part was that every soul should have a portion of order and chaos. However, the two halves of soul that were torn apart were far purer than an ordinary person's soul. If an ordinary soul is a ratio of 5 to 5, then the Child of the Abyss is more than 9 to 1. And so, the true Child of the Abyss and Child of Order were born. They were born with the power of chaos and order. Cavendish was still smiling, as if he was talking about someone else's matters. It's just like the difference between the upper and lower planes. The portion that was inclined towards order would instinctively float up and be born first, becoming the older brother. The portion that was inclined towards chaos would sink down and become the younger brother. For the two sisters, this was simply a happy ending. And so, they each possessed one of the Child of the Abyss and attempted to control their fates so that they would ultimately fight and kill each other. Now that I had explained things to such an extent, I could pretty much imagine what would happen next. Cynthia possessed Carwin's body and gave him the ability to grow like a golden finger. Cynthia also arranged the most fatal misfortune for the Child of the Abyss, hoping that he would become even more powerful through this misfortune. And so, our Mist Kingdom was destroyed because of this. Meanwhile, Astria possessed me and learned about the system from the messy novels in my head. She then combined it with information from other worlds and transformed her prophecy into a game guide to guide my fate. And so, Cavendish became the Prince of the Abyss, while I became the so-called illegitimate child of the Holy Light. But, they finally went too far. Their chess pieces were out of their control. Maniacal laughter appeared on Carwin's familiar face. His mysterious fanaticism was frightening. Carwin's smile actually began to distort with fear, excitement, fear, and fearlessness. All sorts of emotions made Carwin's face look as if it was forcefully pieced together from a jigsaw puzzle. I could sense that this was the true Carwin's, the purest child of the chaos abyss after all order was taken away from him. My dearest older brother, you should have knowledge from other worlds, right? Right. I don't have any at all, so it can only be because you have it. You also invented all those messy things when you were young, so you must have knowledge from other worlds. And to be able to create such a world, it must also be the result of knowledge from other worlds. Yep, I'm so happy. The goal that Cynthia's mother didn't have much hope for has actually been realized. A weapon that can truly kill the creator goddess has actually been successfully created. Do you know how happy I was when I heard this news? Cavendish's fanatical gaze looked towards this world of ice and snow, as if he could see through everything. He saw the Tower of Holy Light Salvation at the top, as well as the invisible Tower of Death. Cavendish had long since known the structure of the four towers, and he had come to this Tower of Ice precisely for this moment. Wonderful, truly wonderful. This is the world. Older brother, you've succeeded. It's this powerful weapon that can slay the gods. You've become the guillotine, and I've brought the prisoners awaiting death. Now, we can execute the two creator goddesses who caused the entire world to suffer. Let us take revenge. Let us first kill our mother, and then kill that fake goddess of order. Come, let us destroy the shackles of the old generation and return freedom to chaos. Let everything return to freedom and truth. This is both revenge and a declaration of ascending to the throne. The era of the twin goddesses of order has ended, and the future era belongs to us. The twin stars of order and chaos.